The coffee cup shattered against the floor, dark liquid spreading like blood across white tile. The quiet blonde woman in scrubs didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply lifted her phone with steady hands, and in that moment, Deputy Marcus Brennan realized he'd just made the worst mistake of his career. Her name was Dr. Emma Caldwell. To everyone in that roadside diner in Hollow Ridge, she looked like nothing, just another exhausted healthcare worker grabbing food after a brutal shift at Riverside Medical Center. Harmless, invisible, forgettable. But Marcus saw something else. He saw someone who didn't belong, someone suspicious, someone who needed to be controlled. "You've been watching people," he said, his voice cutting through the diner's quiet hum. Emma's eyes stayed on her plate. "I'm eating pie." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Every conversation had stopped. Every eye had turned. And then Marcus made his move, the one that would change everything. Before we continue, I want to invite you to stay with me until the very end of this story. If you enjoy what unfolds, please hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel around the world. The evening shift at Riverside Medical Center had been 17 hours of controlled chaos. Emma Caldwell had sutured lacerations, stabilized a cardiac patient, assisted in emergency surgery, and talked a teenager through a panic attack, all while maintaining the calm, professional demeanor that had become her signature. When she finally clocked out at 11:47 p.m., her scrubs were speckled with blood. Her hair had escaped its ponytail in wisps around her face, and every muscle in her body screamed for rest. But home was 40 minutes away, and her stomach felt like it was eating itself. The Crossroads Diner sat at the intersection of Route 29 and Miller's Pass, a 24-hour beacon of fluorescent light and the smell of coffee that had been sitting too long on the burner. Emma had stopped there dozens of times over the past 2 years, always late, always alone, always ordering the same thing, black coffee and whatever pie hadn't sold out. Tonight, it was cherry. She slid into the booth near the back window, the vinyl creaking under her weight. The diner was nearly empty, a trucker at the counter nursing his third refill, an elderly couple sharing a plate of fries, and 2 deputies sitting near the entrance, their voices low but their posture alert. Small-town cops on night patrol, watching their territory with the territorial intensity of guard dogs. Emma didn't pay them attention. She'd learned long ago that blending in meant not making eye contact, not drawing focus, not existing loudly enough to be noticed. The waitress brought her coffee without being asked. "Long night, honey?" "The usual," Emma said with a tired smile. "Pie's coming right up." Emma pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages she was too exhausted to answer. Her sister had sent photos of her niece's birthday party, bright balloons and cake-smeared smiles. A colleague had forwarded a research article about trauma protocols. The hospital administrator had sent yet another email about mandatory training sessions. She set the phone down and rubbed her eyes, feeling the grit of exhaustion beneath her lids. That's when she felt it, the weight of someone's stare. She glanced up. Deputy Marcus Brennan was watching her from across the diner, his eyes narrowed in assessment. He was mid-30s, broad-shouldered, with the kind of jaw that looked like it had been carved specifically for intimidation. His uniform was crisp despite the late hour, his badge catching the overhead lights. Emma looked back down at her phone. The pie arrived. She thanked the waitress and cut into the lattice crust, watching cherry filling pool around her fork. The first bite was perfect, tart and sweet, and exactly what she needed. "Excuse me." The voice came from directly beside her booth. Emma looked up. Marcus Brennan stood there, one hand resting on his belt near his weapon, the other holding a small notepad. His partner, younger, nervous-looking, hovered a few feet behind him. "Can I help you?" Emma asked, her tone polite but neutral. "You've been sitting here a while," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. "About 10 minutes," Emma replied. "I just ordered." "You've been watching people?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Emma set down her fork carefully, aware that every other person in the diner had gone silent, listening. "I'm eating," she said simply. "That's not what I asked." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I asked if you've been watching people, looking around, paying attention to who comes and goes." Emma's pulse stayed steady. Years of emergency medicine had taught her to remain calm when everything around her was chaos. "I'm tired. I just finished a shift at the hospital. I'm eating pie and drinking coffee, and then I'm going home. What hospital? Riverside Medical Center. You a doctor? Trauma specialist. Marcus's eyes flicked to her scrubs, looking for some confirmation she couldn't provide at midnight in a roadside diner. You have ID? This was the moment that separated the careful from the reckless. Emma could feel the shift in the air, the way Marcus's partner had moved slightly to her right, boxing her into the booth, the way the trucker at the counter had turned to watch, the way the elderly couple had stopped eating. Am I being detained? Emma asked quietly. Marcus's expression hardened. I'm asking for your identification. And I'm asking if I'm being detained. Because if I'm not, then I don't have to provide ID. I'm sitting in a public establishment eating food I paid for, and I haven't broken any laws. The silence that followed was the kind that precedes explosions. Marcus leaned forward, placing both hands on the table. Listen to me very carefully. You've got two choices here. You can cooperate and show me your ID, or you can make this difficult. And if you make this difficult, I guarantee you're not going to like how the rest of your night goes. Emma met his eyes without blinking. She'd stared down trauma cases that would have broken most people. She'd held pressure on wounds while bullets were still flying. She'd made life or death decisions in fractions of seconds. A small-town deputy trying to flex his authority didn't even register on her scale of actual threats. I'm going to finish my pie, she said calmly, and then I'm going to pay my bill and leave. If you want to detain me, you'll need probable cause. Otherwise, I'm exercising my right to be left alone. Marcus's face flushed red. Stand up. No! I said stand up. His hand moved to her arm, fingers closing around her bicep with enough force to bruise. Emma didn't resist. She'd been trained not to escalate physical confrontations with law enforcement, but her other hand moved smoothly to her phone on the table. You're making a mistake, she said quietly, her voice carrying a warning that most people would have recognized. Marcus didn't hear it. Or maybe he heard it and didn't care. His ego had taken control now, riding the wave of perceived disrespect in front of witnesses. The only mistake here is you thinking you can talk back to law enforcement, he snarled, yanking her to her feet. The coffee cup tipped, dark liquid splashing across the white table and dripping onto the floor. You're coming with me for questioning. On what grounds? Suspicious behavior, failure to comply. Take your pick. Emma's phone was still in her left hand. Marcus hadn't noticed, too focused on asserting dominance, on making sure everyone in the diner knew who had the power in this interaction. But Emma wasn't everyone. She was someone who'd spent 6 years in places where chaos was the baseline and control was an illusion. She was someone who'd learned that real authority didn't need to shout. Real power didn't need to prove itself. And she was someone who'd made a promise to herself, that she would never be powerless again. Her thumb moved across her phone's screen. 3 taps, each one deliberate. The call connected instantly. Code Nightfall, Emma said, her voice dropping into a tone that didn't match the soft-spoken doctor who'd ordered pie 15 minutes ago. This is Caldwell. Location compromised. Marcus froze, his grip on her arm loosening slightly. What the hell are you? Confirm identity, a male voice responded through the phone's speaker, sharp and immediate. Emma's entire demeanor shifted. The exhausted hospital worker disappeared, replaced by something harder, more controlled. Former Army Trauma Unit, Clearance Delta 7, Authorization Code Crimson Shepherd 9. The diner had gone completely silent. Marcus's partner took a step back, his hand moving unconsciously toward his weapon. The trucker at the counter had his phone out, filming. The elderly couple sat frozen, forks halfway to their mouths. Confirm location, the voice on the phone commanded. Crossroads Diner, Route 29 and Miller's Pass, Hollow Ridge. Local law enforcement attempting detention without cause. Situation escalating. Hold position, response en route. ETA 4 minutes. The call ended. Emma lowered her phone and looked at Marcus. His face had gone from red to pale, uncertainty finally creeping into his expression. What did you just do? He demanded, but his voice had lost its aggressive edge. I made a phone call, Emma said simply. Just like any citizen has the right to do. Who did you call? People who are very interested in situations like this. Marcus's jaw worked, pride and growing unease warring in his expression. His partner cleared his throat nervously. Marcus, maybe we should. Shut up, Marcus snapped. He looked back at Emma, and she could see him trying to regain control of a situation that was slipping away from him. You think you're smart? You think making some phone call is going to... The sound hit first, not sirens, helicopters. The entire diner shook as the rotors passed overhead, low enough that the windows rattled in their frames. The fluorescent lights flickered. Outside, the darkness was suddenly pierced by spotlights sweeping across the parking lot. Marcus's eyes went wide. Through the windows, Emma could see them arriving, 3 black SUVs, moving in coordinated formation, surrounding the diner with military precision. Their headlights cut through the night like searchlights. Doors opened in unison. Figures emerged, moving with the kind of controlled urgency that spoke of extensive training. They weren't local police. They weren't even state troopers. These were federal operators, and they moved like they owned the ground they walked on. Marcus's hand finally released Emma's arm completely. He took a step back, his face now drained of all color. What the hell is this? Emma straightened her scrubs, her expression calm. This is you learning that not everyone is who they appear to be. The diner's door burst open. A woman entered first, late 30s, dark hair pulled back, wearing tactical gear with a federal badge clipped to her vest. Her eyes swept the room in a single, comprehensive assessment before locking onto Emma. Behind her, 3 more operators entered, taking positions that covered the entire space. They weren't pointing weapons, but their presence alone was enough to make everyone in the diner understand that resistance would be both futile and foolish. The woman's gaze moved from Emma to Marcus, then back. Dr. Caldwell? Agent Torres, Emma acknowledged with a slight nod. Torres crossed to Emma in 3 strides, her expression professional but carrying an undercurrent of concern. Are you injured? No, but Deputy Brennan here seems to have some confusion about proper procedure. Torres turned to face Marcus, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Deputy Marcus Brennan, badge number 4127? Marcus's mouth opened and closed. Yes. Who are you? Special Agent Rebecca Torres, Department of Defense Inspector General's Office. She held up her credentials, federal badge, clearance documentation that Marcus couldn't possibly verify in his current state of shock. You just attempted to detain a protected federal consultant without cause. You applied physical force to someone with active security clearance, and you did it in front of witnesses. I didn't know, Marcus started. That's precisely the problem, Torres cut him off. You didn't know. You didn't verify. You made assumptions and acted on them with the full weight of your badge and your weapon. Do you understand how serious this is? Marcus's partner had gone pale as well, standing frozen near the door. The trucker at the counter was still filming, his phone capturing every second. The elderly couple sat motionless, witnesses to something that would be talked about in Hollow Ridge for years. Torres gestured to one of her operators. Secure the scene. I want statements from every witness, and I want that body cam footage. I don't have to give you anything, Marcus said, but his voice wavered. Torres stepped closer to him, her voice dropping to a tone that was somehow more threatening for its quietness. Deputy Brennan, you have 2 options. You can cooperate fully with this investigation, or you can obstruct a federal inquiry. One of those options ends with you keeping your job. The other ends with you in a federal courtroom explaining your actions to a judge. Choose wisely. Emma watched Marcus's face cycle through emotions: anger, fear, defiance, and finally, grudging acceptance. He reached for his body cam with shaking hands, unclipping it from his vest. Torres took it, handing it to another operator. Preserve this. Chain of custody starts now. She turned to Emma, her expression softening slightly. Dr. Caldwell, I'm going to need you to give a full statement, everything that happened from the moment you entered this establishment. Of course, Emma said. And I apologize for the response time. 4 minutes is too long. It was adequate. Torres's eyes held Emma's for a moment, an entire conversation passing between them in silence. Then she nodded. Understood. The next 20 minutes were a choreographed operation of witness interviews, evidence collection, and documentation. The other patrons gave their statements, the trucker describing what he'd seen, the elderly couple corroborating the confrontation, the waitress confirming that Emma had done nothing unusual. Marcus and his partner were separated, each giving their version of events to different operators. Emma could see Marcus trying to justify his actions, explaining that he'd had reasonable suspicion, that Emma had been acting strangely, that she'd refused to comply with lawful orders. But body cam footage didn't lie, and witness statements were remarkably consistent. Emma sat in her booth, her pie long since cold, giving her account in the same calm, professional voice she used when briefing surgical teams. She described arriving at the diner, ordering her food, being approached by Marcus, his escalating aggression, his physical contact without cause. Torres listened, taking notes, asking clarifying questions. "Why didn't you identify yourself immediately?" Torres asked. "You could have shown your credentials." Emma's expression didn't change. "Because I shouldn't have to. I was a civilian, in civilian clothes, engaging in a completely legal activity. The moment I present credentials to justify my existence, I validate the assumption that people like me need special permission to exist in public spaces." Torres was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. "Understood." Outside, more vehicles had arrived, local police supervisors, a representative from the sheriff's office, someone from the county attorney's office. Emma could see them talking with Torres's team, their body language shifting from defensive to increasingly concerned as they learned what had transpired. Marcus sat at a table near the window, his head in his hands. His partner stared at the floor. Both of them were beginning to understand that their careers had just been fundamentally altered. The elderly couple approached Emma before they left, the woman reaching out to touch her hand. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not backing down." Emma gave her a small smile, just standing up for what's right. The trucker stopped by as well. "That video is going to be everywhere by morning," he said, "just so you know." "That's fine," Emma replied. "Sometimes people need to see the truth." When the diner finally started to empty, Torres sat down across from Emma. "This is going to get complicated," she said bluntly. "Local law enforcement doesn't like federal oversight. There's going to be pushback." "There always is," Emma said. "Are you prepared for that? The attention, the scrutiny." Emma thought about all the times she'd been scrutinized before. In field hospitals under fire, in military tribunals defending her decisions, in hospital board meetings justifying her methods. She thought about every time someone had looked at her and seen only what they expected to see. A woman, a nurse, someone soft and manageable. She thought about how many times they'd been wrong. "I've been prepared for a long time," she said. Torres studied her face. "I read your file, 6 years in combat trauma units, 3 tours in active war zones, 17 commendations, 2 classified operations that I don't have clearance to know the details of. You saved more lives than most people will ever meet." "I was doing my job." "You were exceptional at your job, which is why you still have clearance, which is why that phone call activated a response protocol, which is why—" Torres paused. "Why you could have avoided all of this by just showing him your credentials." "But then nothing would have changed," Emma said quietly. "He would have backed down because of who I was, not because what he was doing was wrong. And the next person he stops, someone without credentials, without protection, they'd still be vulnerable to the same abuse of power." Torres leaned back, a slight smile crossing her face. "You set this up. I exercised my rights as a citizen. What happened after that was a natural consequence of someone violating those rights. You're going to make enemies? I made enemies the moment I refused to be quiet and compliant." Through the window, Emma could see Marcus being escorted to one of the federal vehicles. His badge had been surrendered, his weapon secured, his career effectively over, pending investigation. She felt no satisfaction in it, only the quiet certainty that something necessary had occurred. Torres stood, handing Emma a card. "If you need anything, and I mean anything, you call that number. 24 hours. Direct line." "Thank you." "And Dr. Caldwell?" Torres's expression grew serious. "Be careful. This is going to make waves. Some people don't like waves." Emma took the card, slipping it into her pocket. "Some waves need to be made." After Torres and her team departed, the diner returned to an approximation of normal. The manager comped Emma's meal, apologizing profusely for the disruption. The waitress brought fresh coffee. The cook peered out from the kitchen, giving Emma a thumbs up. Emma sat in the quiet, drinking her coffee, thinking about the cascade of events that would follow. She knew how this worked. The investigation would expand, looking at Marcus's history, examining other stops he'd made, other people he'd confronted. Patterns would emerge, other victims would come forward, and somewhere in Hollow Ridge and the surrounding counties, in police departments across the state, officers would hear about what happened when you misjudged someone, when you assumed vulnerability, when you confused quiet strength for weakness. Her phone buzzed, text messages flooding in from colleagues who'd already seen the trucker's video making its rounds on social media. Concerned questions, offers of support, warnings about backlash. She answered a few, ignored most. When she finally left the diner at 1:30 a.m., the parking lot was empty except for her car. The helicopters had gone. The federal vehicles had departed. Even Marcus's patrol car had been towed. The night was quiet again. Emma drove home through darkness, windows down, letting the cool air clear her head. She thought about going into work tomorrow, or rather, later today, and facing questions. She thought about the hospital administration's reaction. She thought about whether this would affect her position, her relationships with law enforcement who brought in trauma cases, her ability to do her job. But mostly, she thought about the look on Marcus's face when he'd realized his mistake. That moment when authority crumbled and accountability arrived. That moment when power shifted. Her apartment was dark and welcoming. She showered, washing away the smell of coffee and tension. She checked her phone one last time, 73 new messages, 12 missed calls, and a text from Torres. Investigation officially opened. You'll be contacted for formal testimony. Get some rest. Emma set an alarm for 6 a.m. 4.5 hours of sleep. Not enough, but she'd functioned on less. As she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she thought about all the people who'd been in Marcus's position before, stopped without cause, questioned without justification, forced to prove their right to exist in spaces they had every legal right to occupy. She thought about the ones who'd complied out of fear, the ones who'd been arrested for nothing, the ones who'd had their lives disrupted, their dignity stripped, their safety compromised. And she thought about the fact that she'd had the resources, the training, the clearance, the connections, to fight back in a way most people couldn't. It wasn't fair, it wasn't justice, but it was a start. Her last thought before sleep took her was simple. Tomorrow, the real work begins. The alarm shattered the darkness at 6 a.m., pulling Emma from dreams of helicopter rotors and flashing badges. She silenced it with practiced efficiency, her body moving on autopilot through the morning routine. Shower, coffee, scrubs. The exhaustion sat heavy in her bones, but that was nothing new. She'd done entire shifts on less sleep, had sutured wounds while running on pure adrenaline and muscle memory. Her phone showed 217 notifications. She ignored them all. The drive to Riverside Medical Center took her through the heart of Hollow Ridge as it woke. Gas stations opening, delivery trucks making rounds, early shift workers grabbing coffee. The town looked exactly as it had yesterday, as it had for the past 2 years she'd lived here. But something fundamental had shifted beneath the surface, like a fault line waiting to rupture. Emma pulled into the hospital parking lot at 6:47 a.m., 13 minutes early for her 7 o'clock shift. 3 news vans sat in the visitor parking area, their satellite dishes extended like metal flowers seeking sun. Reporters stood with camera crews drinking coffee from thermoses, checking their equipment. She'd expected this. What she hadn't expected was the security guard waiting at the employee entrance. Dr. Caldwell? He was young, maybe 25. His uniform crisp, but his expression uncertain. Dr. Morrison wants to see you before your shift starts. Does he? It's not optional. Emma studied his face, seeing the discomfort there. He was just doing his job, following orders from someone higher up the chain. Lead the way. They walked through corridors she knew by heart, past the emergency department where she'd spent countless hours, past the surgical wing where she'd saved lives that statistics said should have been lost. Nurses glanced at her as she passed, some with curiosity, some with something that looked like respect, a few with concern. Doctor. Richard Morrison's office occupied a corner of the administrative wing, all wood panels and leather chairs, and the kind of quiet that came from being insulated from the chaos of actual medicine. His secretary, a stern woman named Patricia, who'd worked at Riverside longer than Emma had been alive, looked up as they approached. "He's waiting," she said, her tone unreadable. The security guard stepped back, his job done. Emma knocked once and entered without waiting for permission. Morrison sat behind his desk, a man in his early 60s who'd spent more years in administration than he had practicing medicine. Salt and pepper hair perfectly styled, suit perfectly pressed, expression perfectly calibrated to convey serious concern without actual emotion. He wasn't alone. Two other people occupied the chairs facing his desk. A woman in her 50s wearing an expensive blazer and carrying a leather portfolio, and a man about Morrison's age in a sheriff's department uniform, his badge reading Sheriff William Garrett. Emma closed the door behind her. "Dr. Caldwell," Morrison said, gesturing to the empty chair. "Please sit." "I prefer to stand. I have a shift in 10 minutes." Morrison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "This won't take long, Doctor. Caldwell, this is Janet Reynolds, our hospital's legal counsel, and Sheriff Garrett, who oversees law enforcement for the county." Emma nodded to each of them, but said nothing. Reynolds spoke first, her voice carrying the measured cadence of someone who'd given difficult news many times before. "Dr. Caldwell, we've received several inquiries this morning regarding the incident at the Crossroads Diner last night. News outlets, social media attention, and questions from the state medical board." "I'm aware," Emma said. "The video has been viewed over 2 million times," Reynolds continued. "It's trending on multiple platforms. Major news networks are picking up the story, and we need to discuss how this affects your position here at Riverside." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Morrison leaned forward, his fingers steepled on the desk. "Emma, you understand that this hospital has relationships with local law enforcement. We depend on their cooperation for patient transfers, emergency situations, criminal investigations involving our patients. What happened last night has complicated those relationships significantly." "What happened last night," Emma said quietly, "was a deputy assaulting me without cause. Everything that followed was a consequence of his actions, not mine." Sheriff Garrett cleared his throat. "Dr. Caldwell, Deputy Brennan is a good officer who made an error in judgment. The situation escalated unnecessarily because he put his hands on me," Emma interrupted, her voice still calm but carrying an edge that made Garrett pause. "Because he attempted to detain me without probable cause. Because he decided that his authority mattered more than my rights. That's why it escalated." "You could have shown him your credentials," Morrison said. "You could have de-escalated. Why should I have to prove who I am to justify existing in a public space?" Reynolds shifted in her chair. "Dr. Caldwell, we're not here to debate the philosophical merits of your actions. We're here to discuss practical realities. The hospital board is concerned about the negative attention this is bringing to Riverside. We're a community institution. We can't afford to be seen as antagonistic to law enforcement." Emma felt something cold settle in her chest. "What exactly are you saying?" Morrison exchanged glances with Reynolds and Garrett. "We think it would be best if you took a leave of absence. Paid, of course. Just until the media attention dies down and the investigation is concluded." "You're suspending me." "We're suggesting a temporary step back for everyone's benefit." "Everyone's benefit," Emma repeated. "Or the hospital's reputation?" "Both can be true," Reynolds said. "Dr. Caldwell, you're an excellent physician. Your record here is exemplary. But right now, your presence is creating complications that affect our entire institution. Taking a few weeks away would allow tensions to cool, would give the federal investigation time to conclude, and would demonstrate that Riverside takes these matters seriously." Emma looked at each of them in turn. Morrison, who wouldn't meet her eyes directly. Reynolds, who maintained professional detachment like armor. Garrett, who seemed to think this was all just unfortunate misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with the right words. "No," Emma said. Morrison blinked. "I'm sorry?" "I said no. I won't take a leave of absence. I haven't violated any hospital policies. I haven't compromised patient care. I was assaulted while off duty, and I defended my rights. If you want to suspend me, you'll need to find cause that doesn't amount to, 'You embarrassed us by refusing to be a victim.'" Reynolds' expression hardened. "Dr. Caldwell, I strongly advise you to reconsider. The board has significant discretion in personnel matters. Then let them use it. Put it in writing. Make it official. And when the Department of Defense asks why you suspended a federal consultant with active clearance for exercising her constitutional rights, you can explain that decision to them." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. Sheriff Garrett stood abruptly. This is exactly what I was talking about. The arrogance, the disrespect for authority. Emma turned to face him fully. Sheriff Garrett, with all due respect, your deputy put his hands on me without cause. He attempted to intimidate me into compliance. He violated my rights because he assumed I was someone who could be controlled. If you're defending that behavior, then the problem isn't my arrogance, it's your department's culture. Garrett's face flushed red. Marcus Brennan has served this community for 8 years. He's made hundreds of contacts without incident. One mistake doesn't erase that record. How many of those contacts involved people who look like me? Emma asked. How many involved people who were alone, vulnerable, without resources to fight back? Because I guarantee you, Sheriff, I'm not the first person your deputy has bullied. I'm just the first one who had the ability to make him face consequences. That's enough, Morrison said, standing. Dr. Caldwell, you're clearly not in a frame of mind to discuss this rationally. I'm going to give you until end of business today to reconsider the leave of absence. If you refuse, the board will convene an emergency meeting tomorrow to determine next steps. Emma checked her watch. It's 7:02. My shift started 2 minutes ago. I have patients waiting. Unless you're formally suspending me right now, I'm going to do my job. She didn't wait for permission. She turned and walked out of Morrison's office, her footsteps echoing in the administrative wing's quiet corridors. The emergency department was already in motion when she arrived. Nurses triaging patients, residents reviewing charts, the familiar controlled chaos that was the rhythm of trauma medicine. Dr. James Parker, the ED attending on duty, looked up as she entered. Caldwell, glad you're here. We've got a multi-vehicle accident coming in, ETA 4 minutes, 3 critical, 2 stable. What do we know? Head-on collision on Route 29, about 2 miles from the Crossroads Diner. Parker paused meaningfully. Media's been calling all morning asking if you're working today. I am. Good. Because I need your hands, not your drama. But there was no malice in his voice, just the blunt honesty of someone who'd worked beside her through enough emergencies to know what she was capable of. The next 3 hours were a blur of trauma protocols, assessing injuries, prioritizing interventions, coordinating with surgical teams. A teenage girl with internal bleeding stabilized and rushed to the OR. A middle-aged man with a crushed leg, requiring careful extraction of metal fragments. An elderly woman in shock brought back from the edge through careful fluid management and constant monitoring. Emma moved through it all with the same focused intensity she brought to every shift, her personal situation completely compartmentalized. In the trauma bay, there was no room for distraction. There was only the patient, the problem, and the solution. But she could feel the attention, nurses whispering when they thought she couldn't hear, residents sneaking glances at their phones, security guards lingering near the ED entrance. At 10:30 a.m., during a brief lull, one of the younger nurses approached her. Sarah Mitchell, fresh out of nursing school, still bright-eyed despite the brutal realities of emergency medicine. Dr. Caldwell? Sarah's voice was quiet, hesitant. I just wanted to say, what you did last night was brave. Emma looked up from the chart she was reviewing. I just stood up for myself. That's what I mean. My cousin, she got pulled over last year. The cop made her get out of the car, searched her vehicle, made her wait on the side of the road for an hour in the rain, never gave her a ticket, never explained why he stopped her. She was just supposed to accept it. Sarah's eyes were bright with emotion. She told me about it once, and I could see how it affected her, how it made her feel small and powerless. So when I saw that video, I wanted you to know it mattered. Before Emma could respond, Parker's voice cut through the department. Caldwell! Incoming GSW! 2 minutes out! She was moving before he finished the sentence, Sarah's words echoing in her head as she scrubbed in, as she prepared the trauma bay, as she waited for the ambulance to arrive with another life hanging in the balance. The gunshot victim was a 17-year-old kid named Marcus, the coincidence of the name not lost on Emma as she worked to save him. Entry wound in the left shoulder, exit wound clean, no major arterial damage, but significant soft tissue trauma and risk of infection. He'd been shot during an attempted robbery at a convenience store, the suspect still at large. 2 police officers accompanied him, taking up positions outside the trauma bay. Emma was acutely aware of their presence as she worked, their eyes tracking her every move, their radios crackling with updates about the ongoing manhunt. But her focus never wavered. The patient's trauma didn't care about politics or public perception. Blood loss didn't pause for uncomfortable tensions. So she did her job, stabilizing, debrieding, preparing him for surgery, while the officers watched and the rest of the ED tried to pretend everything was normal. At noon, her phone buzzed with a text from Agent Torres. County prosecutor opening investigation into Brennan's conduct. Expect media coverage to increase. Stay safe. At 12:30, the hospital's PR department released a statement. Riverside Medical Center is aware of recent events involving one of our physicians. We are conducting an internal review while supporting all involved parties. We remain committed to providing excellent care to our community. The statement was careful, neutral, and utterly meaningless. It supported everyone and no one, took no position, made no stand. It was exactly what Emma expected from an institution trying to protect itself. At 1:15 p.m., during her lunch break that consisted of cold coffee and a granola bar eaten standing up, Morrison's secretary found her. Dr. Caldwell, the board meeting has been moved to 4 p.m. today. You're required to attend. I'm on shift until 7. Dr. Parker will cover your remaining hours. Emma crushed the empty granola bar wrapper in her fist. Understood. The afternoon crept by with agonizing slowness. More patients, more procedures, more whispered conversations that stopped when she entered rooms. At 3:45, she changed out of her scrubs and into the spare business casual clothes she kept in her locker, gray slacks and a white blouse, professional and unremarkable. The boardroom occupied the top floor of the administrative building, all glass walls and polished wood, and the kind of sterile, corporate aesthetic that suggested decisions made here were divorced from the messy reality of actual patient care. 10 people sat around the conference table when Emma entered, Morrison at the head, Reynolds beside him with thick folders of documentation, 5 board members she recognized from hospital fundraisers and mandatory meetings, community leaders, business owners, retired physicians, and 2 people she didn't recognize immediately, a woman in her 40s wearing a federal badge on her belt, and a man in dress blues with enough ribbons on his chest to indicate serious military service. Morrison gestured to the empty chair at the far end of the table. Dr. Caldwell, thank you for joining us. I believe you know most people here, but let me introduce Colonel David Martinez from the Department of Defense and Special Investigator Karen Walsh from the Inspector General's office. Emma shook their hands, noting the firmness of their grips, the assessment in their eyes. These weren't people who'd been brought in to support the hospital's position. These were people who had their own agenda. Before we begin, Morrison said, I want to make clear that this is a personnel matter. The board has legitimate concerns about Dr. Morrison, Colonel Martinez interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. With respect, this stopped being solely a personnel matter the moment Dr. Caldwell activated her federal clearance. We're here to ensure that her rights as a DoD consultant are protected, and that any actions taken by this board comply with federal regulations regarding cleared personnel. Reynolds stiffened. Colonel, Riverside Medical Center is a private institution. We have the right to make employment decisions based on what's best for our organization. Absolutely, Walsh agreed. As long as those decisions aren't retaliatory, discriminatory, or in violation of federal statutes protecting cleared personnel from workplace harassment. The board members exchanged uncertain glances. This wasn't going how they'd expected. Morrison cleared his throat. No one is suggesting retaliation. We're simply concerned about the hospital's reputation and our relationship with local law enforcement. Walk me through that, Martinez said, leaning back in his chair. Dr. Caldwell was assaulted by a deputy while off duty. She defended herself legally. Federal investigators responded appropriately. Which part of that sequence threatens your relationship with law enforcement? The publicity, one of the board members, a retired banker named Harold Chen, spoke up. The media attention. The perception that Riverside is adversarial to police. Adversarial, Emma said quietly, or unwilling to ignore abuse of power? Reynolds shot her a warning look. Dr. Caldwell, you're not helping your case. I wasn't aware I was on trial. You're not, Walsh said firmly. Dr. Caldwell is the victim in this situation. Deputy Brennan violated her constitutional rights. The fact that she had resources to respond doesn't change that fundamental reality. Morrison's frustration was becoming visible. With all due respect to federal authorities, we run this hospital, we make decisions about our staff, and we have serious concerns about Dr. Caldwell's judgment in how she handled the situation. My judgment, Emma said, her voice steady despite the anger building in her chest, was to exercise my rights as a citizen, to refuse illegal detention, to call for help when I was being assaulted. Which part of that demonstrates poor judgment? The part where you escalated instead of de-escalated, Morrison replied. The part where you chose confrontation over cooperation. A simple act of showing your ID would have resolved everything peacefully. Martinez's expression hardened. Doctor, Morrison, are you seriously suggesting that the correct response to unlawful detention is compliance? That citizens should prove their innocence to satisfy the egos of law enforcement officers who haven't established probable cause? I'm suggesting that in a small community, relationships matter. Discretion matters. Dr. Caldwell chose to make a public spectacle instead of handling the situation quietly. There was nothing quiet about a deputy physically grabbing me in a crowded diner, Emma said. He made it public. He made it a spectacle. All I did was refuse to pretend it was acceptable. The room fell into tense silence. One of the board members, a pediatrician named Dr. Susan York, who Emma had always respected, spoke up. I've reviewed the body cam footage, the viral video, the witness statements. Deputy Brennan was aggressive, confrontational, and completely out of line. If we punish Dr. Caldwell for his misconduct, we're sending a message that our staff should accept abuse to protect the hospital's reputation. That's not what we're saying, Reynolds interjected. Then what are you saying? York pressed. Because it sounds like you want her to take a leave of absence for being assaulted. How is that not retaliation? Morrison's face reddened. This is about institutional stability. This is about liability. Martinez cut in. You're worried that standing behind Dr. Caldwell will expose the hospital to complications with local law enforcement. But I guarantee you, pushing her out will expose you to complications with federal authorities. Retaliation against a cleared consultant, creating a hostile work environment, those are serious violations. We're not retaliating, Morrison insisted. We're suggesting a temporary measure to allow tensions to cool. Tensions that exist because a law enforcement officer assaulted one of your doctors, Walsh said. Why should she be the one to step back? Emma watched the board members' faces, seeing the calculation happening behind their eyes. This wasn't about right and wrong anymore. It was about risk management, about which course of action exposed the hospital to less liability, less controversy, less disruption to comfortable relationships. Another board member, a real estate developer named Thompson, leaned forward. What if we offered Dr. Caldwell additional compensation? Increased her salary as a gesture of support while asking her to take a brief voluntary sabbatical? You want to pay me to disappear, Emma said flatly. We want to find a solution that works for everyone. There is no solution that works for everyone, Emma replied, because what works for you, maintaining comfortable relationships with law enforcement who abuse their power, doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for the next person who gets stopped without cause. It doesn't work for anyone who doesn't have the resources to fight back. Morrison slammed his hand on the table. Enough! Dr. Caldwell, your attitude is exactly why we're having this conversation. You seem more interested in making political statements than in being a team player. A team player, Emma repeated, her voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. I've worked double shifts when we were understaffed. I've trained residents who went on to save countless lives. I've taken the cases no one else wanted because they were too complicated, too risky, too likely to fail. I've given this hospital everything, and now you're telling me that the price of being a team player is letting a deputy assault me without consequences? That's exactly what you're saying. You want me to be quiet, compliant, grateful for the opportunity to work here. You want me to know my place, just like Deputy Brennan wanted me to know mine. The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Martinez stood slowly. Dr. Morrison, members of the board, let me be very clear about the federal government's position. Dr. Caldwell holds active security clearance and consultant status with the Department of Defense. Any adverse employment action taken against her will be subject to federal review. If that review determines retaliation, this hospital will face consequences that make media attention look trivial. Are you threatening us? Reynolds demanded. I'm informing you of reality, Martinez replied. You have every right to manage your personnel as you see fit. But Dr. Caldwell has rights too. And unlike most employees, she has the backing of federal authorities who take violations of those rights very seriously. Morrison looked at Reynolds, then at the board members, seeing his authority challenged in a way he'd probably never experienced. This board will need to discuss this matter privately. Of course, Walsh said, standing. Dr. Caldwell, Colonel Martinez and I will be available if you need us. Emma followed them out of the boardroom, her heart pounding, but her expression carefully neutral. They walked to a small conference room down the hall, and the moment the door closed, Martinez turned to her. That went about as expected, he said. They're going to try to force me out, Emma said. Probably, but they'll have to do it carefully, document everything, make sure they can defend it, which buys time. He studied her face. The question is, Dr. Caldwell, what do you want out of this? Emma thought about the question. What did she want? To keep her job? To force an apology? To watch the hospital board squirm under federal scrutiny? No. What she wanted was for the next person, the one without clearance, without resources, without powerful allies, to see this story and know that resistance was possible. That abuse of power could be challenged, that quiet strength could topple institutional arrogance. I want them to understand, she said finally, that they can't make this go away by making me go away. Walsh smiled slightly. Then let's make sure that message gets delivered clearly. They waited in the small conference room for 45 minutes while the board deliberated. Emma checked her phone. The video had now been viewed over 5 million times. News outlets across the country were covering the story. Op-eds were being written about police overreach, about civilian rights, about the power dynamics of small-town law enforcement. Senator Harrison had tweeted about it. Civil rights organizations were issuing statements. Legal scholars were analyzing the confrontation on cable news. The story had grown beyond Hollow Ridge, beyond Riverside Medical Center, beyond any one person's ability to control it. When they were finally called back to the boardroom, Emma could see the exhaustion on Morrison's face. The board members looked drained, their earlier certainty replaced by the weight of impossible choices. Morrison cleared his throat. After extensive discussion, the board has decided to table any personnel decisions regarding Dr. Caldwell pending the completion of the federal investigation into Deputy Brennan's conduct. Dr. Caldwell will remain on active duty with her current responsibilities and compensation. It wasn't victory. It was stalemate. But sometimes stalemate was enough. However, Morrison continued, we ask that, Doctor. Caldwell refrained from making public statements about the incident or the ongoing investigation. That's not a request I can honor, Emma said. If I'm subpoenaed to testify, I'll testify. If investigators ask me questions, I'll answer them. And if reporters ask me about what happened, I'll tell the truth. Reynolds' expression hardened. Dr. Caldwell, we're trying to work with you here. No, you're trying to control the narrative. There's a difference. Martinez interjected. The board can't legally prevent Dr. Caldwell from cooperating with federal investigations or exercising her First Amendment rights. Any attempt to do so would itself be grounds for federal action. Morrison's jaw clenched. Fine. Then this meeting is adjourned. Emma walked out of the administrative building into late afternoon sun, feeling the weight of the past 24 hours settling onto her shoulders. Walsh and Martinez accompanied her to the parking lot, their presence a silent statement about federal interest in her well-being. What happens now? Emma asked. Now, Walsh said, the investigation proceeds. We'll interview witnesses, review Brennan's history, look at department policies. It'll take weeks, maybe months. And in the meantime, you do your job. You live your life. You don't let them intimidate you into silence. Martinez handed her a card. But you also stay alert. This kind of attention makes some people nervous. Nervous people make bad decisions. Emma took the card, adding it to the one Torres had given her. A growing collection of federal contacts, each one a reminder that she'd crossed a threshold she couldn't uncross. They left in their federal vehicle, and Emma sat in her car for a long moment, staring at the hospital's main entrance. Inside those walls, she'd saved lives. She'd made split-second decisions that meant the difference between survival and death. She'd earned respect through competence, through dedication, through sheer refusal to accept that anything was impossible. But respect, she was learning, was conditional. It lasted exactly as long as you stayed within acceptable boundaries, as long as you didn't challenge the comfortable arrangements that kept powerful people powerful. Her phone rang. Unknown number, she answered. Dr. Caldwell. Dr. Caldwell, this is Michael Porter from the Associated Press. I'm doing a story about your confrontation with Deputy Brennan, and I was hoping to get a comment from you. Emma closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision in front of her. Stay quiet, and the hospital would be relieved. Speak up, and she'd cross another line. What do you want to know? She asked. 20 minutes later, she'd given her first interview, calm, factual, refusing to be baited into inflammatory statements, but also refusing to minimize what had happened. Porter had recorded everything, promised to send her quotes for verification before publication. As she finally started her car and pulled out of the parking lot, Emma saw reporters still camped at the visitor entrance. They'd be there tomorrow, too, and the day after. The story had momentum now, a life of its own. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Bit should have shown her ID. You don't know who you're messing with. Then another. Hope you can live with yourself when cops stop responding to your hospital. And another. Federal protection won't last forever. Emma forwarded all three messages to Walsh's number, then blocked the senders. Intimidation was predictable. It meant she'd touched something real, something that people with power wanted to protect. The drive home took her past the Crossroads Diner, now surrounded by news trucks, the parking lot full despite the dinner rush being hours away. People wanted to see the place where the confrontation had happened, wanted to sit in the booth where quiet defiance had triggered a cascade of consequences. Emma drove past without stopping. At home, she showered away the day's tension and changed into comfortable clothes. Her apartment felt smaller somehow, more exposed. She checked the locks on her doors and windows, a habit from years in war zones that had never quite left her. At 8 p.m., her doorbell rang. Emma checked the peephole and saw Agent Torres standing in the hallway, her expression serious. Emma opened the door. Agent Torres? Dr. Caldwell, may I come in? They sat in Emma's living room, Torres declining the offer of coffee or water, her posture suggesting this wasn't a social visit. The investigation has expanded, Torres said without preamble. We've identified 12 other incidents in the past 3 years where Deputy Brennan made questionable stops. 8 involved women, 6 involved people of color. All were alone when contacted. None resulted in citations or arrests. Emma felt something cold settle in her stomach. Pattern behavior. Exactly. We're reaching out to each person, offering them the opportunity to file formal complaints with federal oversight. Several have already agreed. Torres paused. Your case broke this open, Dr. Caldwell. These people thought they were alone, thought no one would believe them, thought complaining would only make their lives harder. You showed them that resistance was possible. What about Brennan? Suspended without pay pending investigation. Sheriff Garrett is furious, claiming federal overreach. The county attorney is making noises about jurisdiction. It's going to get messy. It was always going to get messy. Torres studied her face. Are you prepared for what comes next? The backlash, the threats, the attempts to discredit you? Emma thought about the text messages, the board meeting, Morrison's thinly veiled threats. I'm prepared. Good. Because tomorrow morning, the AP story breaks nationally. By noon, every major outlet will have picked it up. Your name, your face, your story. It's all going to be everywhere. I understand. Torres stood to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, Dr. Caldwell, what you did took courage. A lot of people in your position would have just shown the ID and walked away. A lot of people don't have the privilege of walking away, Emma said. I do, which means I have the responsibility to stand. After Torres left, Emma sat in her quiet apartment and thought about responsibility, about the weight of having resources when others didn't, about the obligation that came with privilege, about the cost of standing when staying silent would be easier. Her phone buzzed. Text from her sister. Saw the news. Are you okay? Emma typed back, I'm fine. Tell Mom not to worry. Another text from Dr. York. Board meeting was brutal. I'm sorry, but you did the right thing. And another from Sarah Mitchell. Thank you for not backing down. Emma set her phone aside and walked to her window, looking out at Hollow Ridge's quiet streets. Somewhere out there, Marcus Brennan was sitting in his house, his career in ruins, facing the reality of consequences he'd never imagined when he grabbed her arm in that diner. Somewhere out there, Sheriff Garrett was planning his counteroffensive, looking for ways to protect his department, his authority, his comfortable arrangement with power. Somewhere out there, Morrison and the hospital board were calculating costs and benefits, weighing reputation against principle, comfort against justice. And somewhere out there, people who'd been stopped, questioned, intimidated, and dismissed were watching this story unfold and thinking maybe, just maybe, their silence could end too. Emma's reflection in the window showed a woman who looked exactly as she had 24 hours ago. Blonde hair, tired eyes, the same face that Marcus had looked at and seen as someone who could be controlled. But everything had changed. The phone rang again. She checked the caller ID, Riverside Medical Center, Emergency Department. She answered. Dr. Caldwell. Emma, it's Parker. We've got a situation. Mass casualty event. Explosion at the chemical plant outside town. We're getting reports of 30 to 40 injured, at least 10 critical. I need every available trauma surgeon in here now. Emma was already moving, grabbing her keys, her bag, her shoes. I'm 15 minutes out. Make it 10. And Emma, Parker paused. One of the injured is a sheriff's deputy. She understood what he wasn't saying. The hospital, the department, everyone would be watching to see how she responded, whether her principles extended to saving the life of someone who worked alongside the man who'd assaulted her. I'll be there in 10, she said, and disconnected. The drive through dark streets was muscle memory, her mind already shifting into the focused calm of emergency response. Personal grievances didn't exist in the trauma bay. Politics didn't matter when someone was bleeding out. The oath she'd taken, to do no harm, to save lives without judgment, didn't come with exceptions for people who'd wronged her. Riverside Medical Center blazed with light when she arrived. Ambulances lined up at the emergency entrance, the organized chaos of mass casualty protocols already in motion. Emma rushed through the doors and into a world where her competence mattered more than her controversy, where her hands could do what no amount of federal authority could accomplish. The deputy was already in Trauma Bay 3, young, maybe 26, his uniform torn and blood-soaked, his breathing shallow and rapid. Chemical burns covered his arms and chest. Shrapnel wounds peppered his abdomen. His eyes, wide with pain and fear, found hers as she entered. Recognition flashed across his face. He'd seen the video. He knew who she was. Am I going to die? He whispered. Emma pulled on gloves, her movements efficient and sure. Not if I can help it. And then there was no time for anything except the work, assessing injuries, calling orders, coordinating with nurses, making split-second decisions about priorities and protocols. The deputy's name was Collins. He had a wife, 2 kids, had been on the force for 4 years. None of that mattered, and all of it mattered in the strange calculus of emergency medicine. She saved his life. Not because of who he was or what he represented, but because that's what she did. That's who she was. That's what her oath demanded. 2 hours later, with Collins stabilized and transferred to the ICU, Emma stood in the surgical scrub room washing blood from her hands and forearms. Parker joined her, looking as exhausted as she felt. You did good work in there, he said. It's the job. It's more than that. He met her eyes in the mirror. Half the department is in the waiting room. They all saw you save one of their own. That matters, Emma. That means something. It means I did my job. It means you proved something they needed to see. That your principles aren't selective. That your competence doesn't come with conditions. He paused. Sheriff Garrett is out there too. He asked to speak with you. Emma dried her hands carefully, each finger, each knuckle, the mechanical motion giving her time to think. Send him to the consultation room off the main waiting area. Give me 5 minutes. Sheriff Garrett looked older than he had in Morrison's office that morning. The explosion had taken something from him. Maybe the certainty that he controlled his county, maybe the comfort of clear enemies and simple solutions. He stood when Emma entered, his expression carefully neutral. Dr. Caldwell, I wanted to thank you for what you did tonight. Deputy Collins, his voice caught slightly. He's a good man, has young kids. What you did? I did my job, Emma said. The same job I do for every patient who comes through those doors. I know, that's what I wanted to Garrett paused, seeming to struggle with words. I owe you an apology. This morning, in that meeting, I defended Marcus Brennan's actions. I made excuses for behavior that was inexcusable. I prioritized protecting my department over acknowledging the truth. That was wrong. Emma studied his face, looking for sincerity beneath the exhaustion. Sheriff, one apology doesn't erase a pattern of behavior. Your deputy didn't just make a mistake. He enacted policies and attitudes that exist throughout your department. The question isn't whether you apologize to me. The question is what you're going to do to make sure it doesn't happen to someone else. Federal investigators are already reviewing our procedures, our training, our complaint history. It's going to be painful, but maybe, he met her eyes, maybe it's necessary pain. Maybe, Emma agreed. But words are easy, Sheriff. Change is hard. And the people who've been hurt by your department's policies need more than apologies. They need accountability. Garrett nodded slowly. I understand. And for whatever it's worth, you have my word that I'll cooperate fully with the investigation. No protecting officers who abuse their authority, no covering up misconduct, no more business as usual. I hope that's true, Emma said, because if it's not, those federal investigators, Torres and Walsh, they're just the beginning. After Garrett left, Emma stood in the empty consultation room, feeling the weight of the past 36 hours finally catching up with her. She'd been assaulted, threatened, pressured to resign, and then thrown into a mass casualty event that demanded everything she had left. And tomorrow, the AP story would break. Tomorrow, the real firestorm would begin. Her phone buzzed. Text from Torres. Chemical plant explosion being investigated as possible sabotage. Evidence suggests someone triggered it deliberately. Stay alert. Emma stared at the message, her exhaustion suddenly replaced by cold clarity. The timing was too coincidental. A major incident that required all hands on deck, that put her in a position to prove her professionalism, that forced the sheriff's department into her debt. Or an incident designed to distract from the investigation, to shift public attention, to create chaos that could be exploited. She texted back, "Who are your suspects?" Torres's response came quickly. Still developing, but someone wanted those chemical storage tanks to explode, and they wanted it to happen tonight. Emma looked through the consultation room's window at the emergency department beyond, still processing injured workers, still coordinating care, still fighting to save lives in the aftermath of what might not have been an accident. And somewhere in the chaos, someone who'd caused it was watching, waiting, calculating their next move in a game Emma hadn't fully understood she was playing until this moment. Her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. She answered. Dr. Caldwell. Heavy breathing. Then a voice, distorted by some kind of filter. You should have stayed quiet. You should have known your place. Now people are hurt. Blood is on your hands. And this is just the beginning. The line went dead. Emma's hand trembled as she lowered the phone. The distorted voice still echoed in her mind. Blood is on your hands. Each word a calculated strike designed to destabilize, to inject doubt, to transform her from victim to villain in her own narrative. She forwarded the recording to Torres immediately, then called hospital security. This is Dr. Caldwell. I just received a threatening phone call. I need someone stationed outside the emergency department and the ICU where Deputy Collins is recovering. Now. The security supervisor's voice carried new urgency. We heard about the call you got earlier. I'll have 2 guards posted within 5 minutes. Emma ended the call and stood motionless in the consultation room, her medical training warring with the adrenaline flooding her system. Patients still needed care. The mass casualty event was still unfolding. People were still arriving with burns, lacerations, respiratory distress from chemical exposure. But someone had just admitted to causing the explosion. Someone had just made her responsible for the casualties filling her emergency department. Parker appeared in the doorway, his scrubs speckled with blood and chemical residue. Caldwell, I need you in Bay 5. Respiratory failure, chemical pneumonitis, patient crashing. She moved instantly, compartmentalizing the threat, the fear, the growing realization that this had escalated beyond a simple confrontation with an aggressive deputy. Bay 5 contained a man in his 50s, his breathing labored despite high-flow oxygen, his lips tinged blue from hypoxia. The acrid smell of industrial chemicals still clung to his skin and clothes. Vitals? Emma asked, already assessing his chest rise, his oxygen saturation, his level of consciousness. Sats dropping despite 15 liters O2, BP falling, respiratory rate 38, and climbing. Emma made the decision in seconds. He needs intubation. Prep for rapid sequence. Get respiratory therapy down here and notify the ICU. We're bringing them another critical. The next 15 minutes were a controlled dance with death, administering sedation, visualizing vocal cords through the laryngoscope, threading the endotracheal tube past damaged airways, connecting the ventilator that would breathe for him until his lungs could recover. If they could recover. The man's name was Robert Vance, plant supervisor, married. 3 grandchildren whose photos were in his wallet, discovered when they searched his clothes for identification and medical information. Emma saved him the same way she'd saved Deputy Collins, because that's what doctors did, because the alternative was unthinkable. But as she watched the ventilator's rhythmic rise and fall, as she adjusted settings to maximize oxygen delivery while minimizing further lung damage, she couldn't stop hearing that distorted voice. This is just the beginning. The emergency department continued its grim work through the night. 32 patients total, ranging from minor injuries to multiple critical cases requiring ICU admission. Emma moved between trauma bays with mechanical precision. Her exhaustion pushed so far past normal limits that she'd entered the strange clarity that came from running on pure muscle memory and professional discipline. At 3 a.m., the last patient was stabilized. The department settled into the quieter rhythm of overnight monitoring. Emma stood at the nurse's station, reviewing charts, ensuring nothing had been missed in the chaos. Her phone buzzed. Torres. Dr. Caldwell, we need to talk. Now. I'm pulling up to the hospital. 5 minutes later, they sat in the same consultation room where Emma had spoken with Sheriff Garrett. Torres wasn't alone. She'd brought 2 other federal agents, both wearing tactical gear, both looking like they'd been pulled from active operations. Torres played the threatening call on her phone, the distorted voice filling the small room. We traced it. Burner phone activated 2 hours ago, signal bouncing off towers throughout the county. Whoever made this call knows how to avoid tracking. Professional, one of the other agents said. His nameplate read Foster. Not some angry citizen making impulsive threats. This is someone with training, resources, methodology. Emma's stomach tightened. You think this is connected to the explosion? We know it is, Torres said. The chemical plant security footage shows a figure entering the facility 40 minutes before the explosion. They knew exactly where to go, which tanks to compromise, how to create maximum damage. This wasn't vandalism or activism. This was precision sabotage. Why? That's what we're trying to determine. But the timing, the same day the AP story about your confrontation with Brennan was scheduled to break, the same night you're working an ED shift, the same moment when federal attention is focused on police misconduct in Hollow Ridge. Torres leaned forward. Someone wanted a distraction, or they wanted to send you a message, or both. The third agent, a woman whose nameplate read Kim, pulled out a tablet. We've been analyzing threats against you since the diner incident went viral. Most are standard internet rage, anonymous accounts, keyboard warriors, people who'll never act on their anger. But 3 stand out. She showed Emma the screen. 3 messages, each from different sources, each escalating in specificity. The first, cops like Brennan keep communities safe. Bitches like you get people killed. The second, you think federal protection makes you untouchable? There are ways around that. The third, Hollow Ridge takes care of its own. Outsiders who cause problems don't last long here. These came from local IP addresses, Kim explained. Not burner phones, not VPNs, not sophisticated hiding. Someone in this town sent these messages and didn't care about being traced. Emma studied the messages, feeling the weight of organized hostility behind the words. You think there's a coordinated effort? We think, Torres said carefully, that you embarrassed powerful people. Deputy Brennan, Sheriff Garrett, the hospital administration, the county power structure that's been operating unchecked for years. You showed the world that their authority has limits. Some people don't respond well to that lesson. Some people respond with violence, Foster added. The question is whether tonight's explosion was meant to hurt you directly or to create enough chaos to drown out your story. Emma's phone buzzed again. Text from an unknown number. Check the news. She opened her browser. The AP story had broken 2 hours early, probably pushed up due to the explosion. The headline read, Army veteran doctor assaulted by deputy. Federal investigation expands to expose pattern of abuse. The article was comprehensive, detailed, devastating. It included Emma's military service record, her trauma surgery credentials, her exemplary performance at Riverside. It included the body cam footage analysis, witness testimonies, the 12 other incidents Torres had mentioned involving Brennan's questionable stops. And it included quotes from Emma's interview. I refuse to show ID because I shouldn't have to prove my innocence to justify existing in a public space. The moment we accept that premise, we accept that some people have rights only by permission of those in power. The story was already trending. 3 million views in 2 hours. Comment sections exploding with debate, with support, with rage. Torres was reading her own phone. County attorney just released a statement defending Brennan. Sheriff Garrett issued a counter-statement criticizing federal overreach. The hospital released another non-statement about supporting all parties and focusing on patient care. Morrison must be thrilled, Emma said quietly. Actually, Morrison resigned an hour ago, effective immediately. Emma's head snapped up. What? Kim turned her tablet around, showing a hospital press release. Board accepted his resignation, cited difference in vision for the institution's future. Reading between the lines, they threw him under the bus to protect themselves. The revelation should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like watching a chess piece being sacrificed, one problem removed to protect larger interests, one scapegoat offered to preserve the real power structure. Who's taking over? Emma asked. Interim CEO is Dr. Susan York, Torres said, the board member who defended you. That was something. Not much, but something. Foster's radio crackled. He listened, his expression darkening. We've got movement at Dr. Caldwell's apartment. Unknown vehicle, 2 occupants, conducting surveillance. Emma's blood went cold. Are they inside? Negative. Parked across the street watching the building. Local PD is en route, but... He paused. Given the current tensions with local law enforcement, we're deploying our own team. Torres stood. Dr. Caldwell, you're not going home tonight. We're moving you to a secure location until we determine the scope of this threat. I have patients who will be cared for by your colleagues, Torres cut her off. You're no good to anyone if you're dead. And whoever made that phone call, whoever bombed the chemical plant, they've already demonstrated willingness to cause mass casualties. You don't get to pretend this isn't serious. Emma wanted to argue, wanted to insist on maintaining her normal life, her routine, her refusal to be intimidated. But the faces in the trauma base tonight, the burns, the breathing tubes, the lives hanging by threads, those weren't abstractions. Those were real consequences of someone's calculated violence. How long? She asked. Until we identify the threat or neutralize it. Could be days, could be weeks. Emma thought about her apartment, her clothes, her life packed into 72 square feet of rented space. Thought about the routine she'd built over 2 years in Hollow Ridge, the careful anonymity she'd maintained, the quiet existence she'd chosen after 6 years of war zones and chaos. All of it shattered by one deputy's ego and her refusal to submit. Let me grab my things from my locker, she said, and I need to brief the incoming shift on patient care. Torres nodded. Foster and Kim will accompany you. Don't leave their sight. The walk through Riverside's corridors felt different now. Not the familiar paths of her workplace, but potentially hostile territory where threats could emerge from any direction. Foster and Kim flanked her, their hands never far from their weapons, their eyes constantly scanning. The locker room was empty at 3:30 a.m. Emma changed out of her blood-stained scrubs into jeans and a sweater, packed a small bag with essentials. Her reflection in this mirror showed someone who looked like they'd aged years in 36 hours, dark circles under her eyes, tension carved into the lines of her face, blonde hair escaping its ponytail in exhausted wisps. She looked like exactly what she was, someone being hunted for, refusing to be prey. The ICU was quieter, the ventilators and monitors providing steady background rhythm. Emma checked on Deputy Collins first, stable, sedated, his wife sitting vigil beside his bed. The woman looked up as Emma entered, her face tear-stained and exhausted. Dr. Caldwell, they told me what you did, how you saved him. Emma checked Collins's chart, adjusting his ventilator settings slightly. How's he doing? Better? They think he'll make it. The wife stood, crossing to Emma. I saw the video of what happened to you. And I know there's bad blood between you and the department, but you saved him anyway. You didn't have to, but you did. I took an oath, Emma said simply. It doesn't come with exceptions. Still, thank you. Emma moved to the next bed. Robert Vance, the plant supervisor, his condition more precarious than Collins's. Chemical pneumonitis was unpredictable, could improve rapidly or deteriorate into acute respiratory distress syndrome. She noted his oxygen requirements, his chest x-ray changes, his arterial blood gas trends. Dr. Parker found her there, reviewing Vance's labs. Caldwell, heard you're leaving. Temporarily. Federal protective custody. It wasn't a question. The situation is getting out of control. It was always out of control. We're just seeing it clearly now. Parker was quiet for a moment. York wants to meet with you, officially as interim CEO. She's in Morrison's old office. Emma glanced at Foster and Kim, who nodded. They accompanied her back through the hospital to the administrative wing, now dark and empty in the pre-dawn hours. York's light was the only one burning, a beacon in the institutional gloom. She looked up as Emma entered, her expression carrying the weight of unexpected authority. Emma, thank you for coming. I know you've had an impossibly difficult night. We all have. York gestured to the chairs across from her desk. Foster and Kim remained by the door, giving them space but maintaining their protective stance. I want you to know, York began, that Morrison's resignation was not the board's first choice. Several members wanted to wait to see how the investigation developed, but I made it clear that I would resign from the board and publicly criticize the hospital's handling of this situation if they didn't act decisively. Emma studied her face. Why? Because what happened to you was wrong. What Morrison tried to force you into was wrong. And if Riverside is going to be an institution worth working for, it needs to stand behind its people when they're victimized, not sacrifice them to protect comfortable relationships with corrupt authorities. The words were right. The sentiment seemed genuine, but Emma had learned to be cautious with institutional promises. What happens when the federal investigation concludes? She asked. When the media attention fades? When there's no more scrutiny to keep people honest? York leaned back, acknowledging the question's weight. Then we'll see whether this was real change or temporary performance. But I can promise you this, as long as I'm CEO, even if it's only interim, anyone who retaliates against you for what happened will answer to me personally, and I'll make that answer very public. Morrison made promises too. Morrison was protecting a system. I'm trying to change one. York paused. I can't guarantee success. I can't promise there won't be resistance or setbacks, but I can promise to try. That's all any of us can do. Emma wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that someone in power actually meant what they said about justice, about accountability, about standing against abuse. But trust was expensive, and recent days had bankrupted her reserves. I appreciate that, she said carefully. I'll be away for a few days, federal protective custody until the threat assessment is complete. I heard. Take whatever time you need. Your position is secure. Until it's not. York met her eyes directly. Emma, I won't lie to you. There will be pressure to let you go quietly. Board members who think the easiest solution is removing you from the equation. Donors who threaten to pull funding. Community members who want everything to return to normal. But normal was broken, and broken systems need to be disrupted before they can be rebuilt. Foster cleared his throat. Dr. Caldwell, we need to move. Emma stood. Thank you, Dr. York. I hope you mean what you say. So do I, York replied quietly. The drive to the secure location took them out of Hollow Ridge, through darkened farmland, to a nondescript house on the outskirts of a neighboring county. Federal safe house, Torres explained, used for protected witnesses, at-risk assets, people who needed to disappear temporarily. The sun was rising as they arrived, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed obscenely beautiful given the circumstances. Emma was installed in a second-floor bedroom with reinforced windows and a direct line to the security team stationed on the first floor. Get some rest, Torres said. We'll have updates this afternoon. But sleep was impossible. Emma lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at unfamiliar ceiling, thinking about the cascade of consequences that had followed one simple refusal to show her ID. Thinking about the patients in her ICU, the deputy she'd saved, the plant supervisor fighting for every breath, thinking about whoever had caused the explosion, who'd made that threatening call, who was still out there planning their next move. Her phone buzzed with news alerts. The AP story had exploded across every major outlet. Cable news was running segments. Op-eds were flooding in from both sides. Some hailed her as a hero standing against police overreach. Others condemned her as an instigator who'd caused chaos and violence. Senator Matthews had given a floor speech about the need for police reform. The police union had issued a statement defending Brennan and attacking federal interference. Civil rights organizations were planning rallies. Counter-protesters were organizing their own demonstrations. Her story had become everyone's story, her confrontation everyone's battleground, her face the symbol of conflicts she'd never intended to represent. At noon, Torres returned with lunch and updates. We identified the vehicle watching your apartment, registered to a private security company based in the state capital. Companies owned by a shell corporation, which is owned by another shell corporation. We're still unraveling the ownership structure. Private security, Emma repeated. Not just angry citizens. No, someone with resources hired professionals to surveil you. The question is whether it's for intelligence gathering or threat assessment for something more aggressive. Kim entered with her tablet. We've got preliminary findings from the chemical plant investigation. The explosive device was military-grade, professionally constructed. Whoever built it had extensive training, possibly military or intelligence background. Emma felt the room tilt slightly. You think this is connected to my military service? We think, Torres said carefully, that you have a history that makes you different from most small-town doctors. 6 years in combat trauma units, classified operations, Delta 7 clearance that still requires federal response protocols. You're not just someone who stood up to a deputy. You're someone with connections, with training, with resources that make you dangerous to certain interests. What interests? That's what we're trying to determine. But consider the timeline. You arrive in Hollow Ridge 2 years ago. You keep a low profile, work hard, stay out of local politics. Then you have one confrontation with a deputy, and suddenly there's a coordinated campaign of harassment, professional retaliation, and now potential violence. Either you're incredibly unlucky, or someone was waiting for an excuse to move against you. The implications settled over Emma like a shroud. You think someone knew who I was before the diner incident? We think it's possible. We're reviewing your background, your deployments, looking for anyone who might have a grudge against you or against operations you were involved in. Military records are being unsealed. CIA is reviewing their files. We're going deep, Dr. Caldwell, because this doesn't feel like simple local corruption anymore. Foster's phone rang. He answered, listened, his expression darkening. Understood. We're secure. He looked at Torres. Deputy Brennan just posted bail. He's out. Torres swore quietly. Who posted it? Anonymous bond. $250,000 paid in cash through a bail bondsman in the capital. Someone wanted him out fast and didn't care about the cost. Emma's training kicked in, analyzing the tactical situation like a combat scenario. They're consolidating assets, getting their people in position. That's our assessment, Torres agreed. Brennan's out, which means he can communicate freely, move without restriction, coordinate with whoever's backing this operation. Operation, Emma said. That's what this is now? An operation? Mass casualty attack, professional surveillance, military-grade explosives, anonymous funding for bail. Yes, Dr. Caldwell, this is an operation, and you're the primary target. The afternoon dissolved into briefings, security assessments, contingency planning. Emma learned about threat levels and response protocols, about the federal resources being deployed, about the interagency coordination happening behind the scenes. At 4 p.m., her phone rang. Unknown number, but Torres nodded permission to answer with the call being traced and recorded. Dr. Caldwell? Emma? The voice was familiar. Sheriff Garrett. I need to speak with you. It's urgent. I'm listening? Not on the phone. In person. There are things you need to know, things I can't say over a line that might be monitored. Torres was already shaking her head, mouthing no. Sheriff, if you have information relevant to the investigation, you can share it with Agent Torres. This isn't about the investigation. This is about keeping you alive. Garrett's voice carried genuine fear. Please, Emma, give me 30 minutes. Neutral location, federal agents present, whatever security you need. But I have to tell you this face to face. Emma looked at Torres, who was running traces, coordinating with her team, calculating risk versus potential intelligence value. Finally, she nodded. Where? Emma asked. The old grain elevator on Route 7. It's been abandoned for years. No civilians. Open sight lines for your security team. 1 hour. The call ended. Torres was already issuing orders, deploying teams, establishing perimeters. This could be a trap. It could also be genuine intelligence, Emma countered. Garrett seemed different last night, like he actually understood the scope of the problem. Or like he's a good actor playing a role. Torres studied Emma's face. You sure you want to do this? Emma thought about the explosion, the threats, the surveillance outside her apartment, thought about whoever was coordinating this campaign against her, whoever had resources and motivation and complete disregard for collateral damage. If Garrett knows something that helps us identify them, it's worth the risk. 45 minutes later, they arrived at the grain elevator, a massive concrete structure slowly being reclaimed by nature, surrounded by overgrown fields and empty land. Federal agents had secured the perimeter, established overwatch positions, swept the building for explosives and electronic surveillance. Garrett's vehicle was already there, parked in the gravel lot, the sheriff standing alone beside it, looking older and more tired than Emma had ever seen him. She approached with Torres, Foster, and Kim flanking her, their weapons visible, their message clear. Sheriff, Emma said, thank you for coming. Garrett looked at the federal agents. What I'm about to tell you puts my career at risk, maybe my life. But you need to know. We're recording, Torres said. Everything you say will be documented and potentially used in federal proceedings. I understand. Garrett took a breath. Deputy Brennan wasn't working alone. The pattern of stops, the targeting of vulnerable people, the lack of consequences, it was all protected from above. By me. By the county attorney. By people who benefited from having law enforcement that could be deployed selectively, that could intimidate, that could control. Emma felt the pieces clicking together. A protection racket. More than that, we had arrangements with local businesses, with property developers, with people who wanted certain areas cleared of undesirables. Brennan and a few other deputies would make life difficult for people we were told were problems. Constant stops, harassment, creating conditions where they'd leave town rather than fight. You're admitting to conspiracy, civil rights violations, abuse of authority under color of law, Torres said. Do you understand what you're confessing to? I understand, and I'm prepared to face consequences. But that's not why I called this meeting. Garrett looked directly at Emma. The chemical plant explosion, it wasn't random. It was a message to me and the county attorney. A demonstration of what happens to people who cooperate with federal investigations. The temperature seemed to drop. Someone bombed a facility and killed people to send you a message? Foster demanded. Not killed. The explosion was timed and placed to cause maximum chaos with minimal fatalities. Every casualty last night. They all survived, didn't they? Emma thought about her patients. Burns, chemical exposure, trauma. But yes, all alive. All critical but stabilizing. You're saying it was calibrated. I'm saying whoever planned it knew exactly what they were doing. They wanted disruption, wanted federal attention divided, wanted to demonstrate capability without crossing the line into mass murder that would trigger unlimited federal resources. Torres was recording everything, her expression carved from stone. Who's behind this? I don't know names. I don't have proof. But there's a network, people with money, with connections, with reasons to keep Hollow Ridge exactly as it is. They've operated here for 20 years, since before I became sheriff. They control property values, business licenses, who gets permits and who gets denied, and they use law enforcement as their enforcement arm. You're describing organized crime, Kim said. I'm describing power, Garrett corrected. Legal on the surface, corrupt underneath, and when you refused to submit to Brennan's authority, when you fought back with federal resources, when you made it impossible to sweep under the rug, you threatened their entire system. Emma's mind was racing through implications. The surveillance on my apartment, the threatening calls. They're escalating because they're scared. You showed that their protection has limits, that federal authority supersedes local power, that people don't have to accept abuse just because it's delivered by someone with a badge. Why tell me this? Emma asked. Why risk yourself? Garrett was quiet for a long moment. Because last night, watching you save Deputy Collins after everything that happened, seeing you put your principles into practice even when it would have been easier to let him die. His voice broke slightly. I realized I'd spent 20 years compromising everything I believed when I took this job. And I can't do it anymore, even if it costs me everything. Torres exchanged glances with her team. Sheriff, you understand that what you've just confessed requires us to take you into custody for questioning. I understand. I'll cooperate fully. Names, dates, incidents, financial records, everything I have access to. Garrett looked at Emma again. But you need to understand. These people won't stop. They can't afford to. You've become too dangerous to ignore and too visible to eliminate quietly. They're going to keep escalating until either you're discredited, silenced, or dead. Then we protect her, Torres said flatly. Federal resources, witness protection protocols, whatever it takes. You can't protect her forever. Eventually, she'll have to leave custody, go back to work, live her life. And they'll be waiting. Emma felt the weight of the trap closing around her. Stay hidden and safe, but give up her career, her principles, her refusal to be silenced, or return to normal life, and accept perpetual threat from enemies she couldn't even identify. Foster's radio crackled. All teams, we have multiple vehicles approaching your location. Count 5 SUVs moving in coordinated formation. Torres's hand went to her weapon. Garrett, did you set us up? No, I came alone, I swear. Vehicles are unmarked but moving with tactical precision, Foster reported. They're not stopping. Torres grabbed Emma's arm. Back to the cars, now. They were moving before she finished the sentence, falling back toward their vehicles in defensive formation. Emma's training kicked in. She'd been in situations like this before, in places where violence could erupt from calm with zero warning, where the difference between survival and casualty was split-second decision-making. The approaching vehicles spread out, blocking exit routes, their windows tinted black, their occupants invisible. 5 SUVs, at least 20 people all moving with military coordination. Foster had his weapon drawn. Federal agents, identify yourselves. One of the SUV's doors opened. A man stepped out, hands visible, wearing casual clothes but carrying himself with unmistakable authority. He was maybe 50, gray hair cropped short, face weathered by experience and calculation. Stand down, Agent Foster, the man said calmly. We're on the same side. Torres positioned herself between Emma and the newcomer. Identify yourself, now. The man reached slowly into his jacket, producing credentials. Colonel David Harrison, Defense Intelligence Agency. Dr. Caldwell is a federal asset under DIA oversight. This situation is now under our jurisdiction. Torres examined the credentials, her expression skeptical. Colonel, this is an ongoing federal investigation, which has just intersected with classified national security interests, Harrison cut her off. Dr. Caldwell's military service involved operations that remain classified at the highest levels. The people targeting her aren't just local criminals protecting local corruption. They're foreign intelligence assets attempting to eliminate someone who knows things they can't afford to have exposed. The world tilted beneath Emma's feet. What are you talking about? She demanded. Harrison's eyes locked onto hers. Dr. Caldwell, during your final deployment, you treated casualties from an operation that exposed a foreign intelligence network operating within U.S. military contractor companies. That network has been dismantled, but some assets remained embedded in American infrastructure. One of those assets apparently tracked you to Hollow Ridge and has been waiting for an opportunity to eliminate you quietly. That was 6 years ago, Bob. Intelligence operations play out over decades, not days. You were under periodic observation to ensure you hadn't been compromised or targeted. When the diner incident went viral, when your face was plastered across every news outlet in the country, it triggered a response from people who'd been waiting for exactly this kind of exposure. Torres stepped forward. If she was under observation, why didn't DIA intervene earlier? Why let this escalate? Because we needed them to expose themselves, Harrison said bluntly. We've been tracking this network for years without being able to identify key nodes. Dr. Caldwell's public profile created pressure that forced them into action. The surveillance, The explosion, the coordination with local corrupt officials. Every move they make gives us more intelligence, more connections, more evidence. Emma felt rage building beneath her shock. You used me as bait. We used a developing situation to advance critical national security objectives, Harrison corrected. But now that situation has reached a point where your continued exposure represents unacceptable risk, which is why I'm here to bring you in. Bring me where? Classified facility where you'll be fully protected while we complete our operation against this network. Torres shook her head. She's in federal protective custody. You can't just... Colonel Harrison has the authority, a new voice interrupted. Agent Walsh emerged from one of the federal vehicles, her expression grim. DIA supersedes our jurisdiction when national security classifications are invoked. Emma looked at Walsh, at Torres, at the federal agents who'd been protecting her, seeing them all rendered powerless by classifications and authorities that existed beyond normal law enforcement channels. She thought about the past 48 hours. The diner, the hospital, the threats, the explosion. She thought about being maneuvered, manipulated, transformed from doctor to symbol to asset to bait. No, she said quietly. Harrison's expression didn't change. Dr. Caldwell, this isn't optional. You're right, it's not. Because I'm not coming with you. You don't understand the danger. I understand perfectly. I understand that you've been watching me for years without my knowledge or consent. I understand that you let me be assaulted, threatened, and terrorized because it served your operational objectives. I understand that you see me as an asset to be managed, not a person with rights and autonomy. Emma's voice remained calm but carried steel underneath. And I understand that the moment I get into one of your vehicles, I disappear into a system where I have no advocates, no protection, no way to ensure you're actually keeping me safe versus simply keeping me silent. Dr. Caldwell, Harrison said, you're making a mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. Torres stepped beside Emma. She's refused your custody, Colonel. Unless you're planning to detain her against her will, which would require legal justification you don't seem to have, she stays with us. Harrison's jaw tightened. Agent Torres, you're interfering with a national security operation. Show me the legal authority for involuntary detention of a U.S. citizen who hasn't been charged with a crime and isn't suspected of one. Show me the classified order that supersedes her constitutional rights. Because unless you can produce that documentation right now, Dr. Caldwell's refusal stands. The standoff stretched across seconds that felt like hours. 20 DIA operatives facing off against a dozen federal agents. Emma standing at the center of a confrontation that could turn violent with one wrong move. Sheriff Garrett's voice cut through the tension. She's right to refuse. Everyone turned to look at him. I spent 20 years compromising, accepting that powerful people got to operate by different rules, believing that institutional authority justified individual injustice. Garrett looked at Emma. Don't make my mistake. Don't trade your freedom for someone else's promise of safety. Harrison's expression hardened. Sheriff, you don't have clearance for this conversation. Mas. I have clearance to witness a federal officer attempting to coerce a civilian into custody without legal justification. And unlike my previous failures, I'm not going to stay silent while someone abuses their authority. Walsh moved to Emma's other side. Colonel Harrison, I'm documenting this encounter. Any attempt to detain Dr. Caldwell without proper legal authority will be reported through oversight channels and will constitute a violation of her civil rights. Harrison looked at his team, at the federal agents, at Emma standing with her unlikely coalition of defenders. Calculation played across his face, tactical assessment of costs and benefits, risks and rewards. This conversation isn't over, he said finally. Dr. Caldwell, people are trying to kill you. We can protect you if you'll let us. People have been trying to kill me for 6 years, Emma replied. I'm still here. Maybe I don't need your kind of protection. Harrison got back into his SUV. The vehicles departed in the same coordinated formation they'd arrived in, leaving only dust and implications in their wake. Torres exhaled slowly. That was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Probably both, Emma said. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline finally catching up with decision-making. But I'm not disappearing into a classified facility where no one can verify I'm actually safe. Fair point. Torres pulled out her phone. But we need to escalate this to my superiors. DIA doesn't back down easily. They'll come at this from another angle. Sheriff Garrett stood off to the side, looking smaller somehow, diminished by his confessions. What happens to me now? Now, Walsh said, you come with us. Full debriefing, complete cooperation, and we start building cases against everyone involved in the corruption network. Will it be enough? To prosecute? Maybe. To dismantle the system? That's going to take years. Walsh paused. But you started something today. You can't take back the damage you've done, but you can help prevent future damage. As they prepared to leave the grain elevator, Emma's phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. She opened it. The message contained a single photo, her apartment building, photographed from above. Drone surveillance. Someone had been watching her home from the air, mapping it, studying it. Below the photo, 3 words. Nowhere is safe. Emma stared at the drone photograph, her tactical mind automatically cataloging the angles, the altitude, the professional quality of the surveillance. This wasn't amateur intimidation. This was reconnaissance conducted by someone who understood operational planning, who knew that psychological warfare preceded physical action. Torres looked over her shoulder at the screen. They're not even hiding anymore. They want you to know you're being watched. Because fear is as effective as actual violence, Emma said quietly. Make the target afraid enough, isolated enough, and they'll remove themselves from the equation without anyone having to pull a trigger. Walsh was already on her phone, coordinating with her team. We're sweeping your apartment for electronic surveillance. If they had drone access, they might have planted devices inside. Sheriff Garrett stood apart from the federal agents, his earlier confession having transformed him from authority figure to cooperating witness. He looked at Emma with something between respect and regret. You're not afraid. I didn't say that. But you're not running. Emma thought about the question underneath his statement, why she kept standing when every rational calculation said to retreat, to accept DIA custody, to disappear into protective systems designed to keep assets safe and silent. I spent 6 years in war zones, she said. I watched people die because they couldn't fight back, couldn't defend themselves, had no power except to endure. I swore that when I had power, I wouldn't waste it on self-preservation. I'd use it to make sure what happened to them didn't keep happening to others. Even if it costs you everything? Especially then. Torres ended a phone call, her expression grim. County attorney just invoked emergency powers to deputize private security contractors. Claims it's necessary to maintain order during the ongoing crisis. Foster swore. They're legalizing their enforcement arm, making the private security watching Dr. Caldwell's apartment official county assets. Which means, Kim added, any action we take against them becomes interference with local law enforcement. They're using bureaucracy as a weapon. Emma felt the trap tightening. Every direction blocked by legal technicalities, jurisdictional boundaries, procedures designed to protect the innocent, but weaponized to shield the guilty. Who's the county attorney? She asked. Thomas Merrick, Garrett said. He's been in office for 15 years, smart, connected, untouchable. And he's the one who coordinated which neighborhoods got policed aggressively and which ones got ignored. He's the architect of the whole system. Torres pulled up a file on her tablet, showing Emma a photograph of a man in his 50s, silver hair, expensive suit, the confident smile of someone who'd never faced real consequences. Merrick's been on our radar since the investigation started. His financial records show payments from shell companies, real estate deals that don't make economic sense, connections to business interests across 3 states. You have evidence of corruption? We have patterns. We have suspicious transactions. What we don't have is the kind of direct proof that survives a courtroom when the defendant can afford the best lawyers money can buy. Then we get that proof, Emma said. Walsh shook her head. Dr. Caldwell, you're not an investigator. You're a target under protective custody. Your job is to stay alive, not to build criminal cases. My job, Emma corrected, is whatever I decide it is. And right now I'm deciding that sitting in a safe house while they dismantle the investigation isn't acceptable. Torres studied her face. What are you proposing? Emma's mind was working through possibilities, applying tactical thinking to civilian problems, treating this like any combat scenario where direct assault was impossible, but flanking maneuvers remained viable. They're escalating because they're scared, she said. The chemical plant explosion, the surveillance, the threats, all of it is defensive posturing from people who know the walls are closing in, which means they're making mistakes, getting sloppy, exposing themselves in ways they wouldn't if they felt secure. And? Foster prompted. And scared people make bad decisions, especially when they're being watched by someone they've underestimated. Kim's eyes narrowed. You want to go back to Hollow Ridge, back to normal life, deliberately make yourself a target. I want to do my job, Emma clarified. I want to treat patients, work my shifts, live visibly and publicly, because every threat they make, every move they take against me, it's documented evidence of conspiracy, of witness intimidation, of organized criminal activity. They can't afford to let me exist freely, and they can't afford to eliminate me without consequences. So they'll keep escalating, and we'll keep documenting, until they cross a line that even their legal protections can't defend. Torres was quiet for a long moment. You're proposing to use yourself as bait. Again. Except this time it's voluntary. This time it's strategic. This time it could get you killed. That was always a possibility, Emma said. The question is whether we use that risk to accomplish something, or whether I hide and accomplish nothing. Walsh exchanged glances with Torres and Foster. Professional calculation played across their faces, weighing operational value against human cost, investigative needs against protective responsibilities. I'd need to clear this with my superiors, Torres said finally. And we'd need protocols. Full surveillance coverage, rapid response teams, communications redundancy. You wouldn't be alone for a second. I understand. And if DIA tries to grab you again, then we deal with that when it happens. Garrett stepped forward. I want to help. I know Merrick, know how he operates. I can provide intelligence on his network, his connections, his vulnerabilities. Walsh nodded. You'll be debriefed extensively. Every name, every transaction, every corrupt decision you witnessed. And Sheriff, once that testimony is formalized, you become a target too. I'm already a target, Garrett said quietly. The moment I called this meeting, the moment I chose truth over complicity, I became as dangerous to them as Dr. Caldwell. The only difference is she has federal protection and I have a guilty conscience. Then you stay in protective custody, Torres said. We can't have you compromised or silenced before testimony is secured. The next 4 hours were intensive planning, establishing surveillance protocols, coordinating federal resources, briefing supervisors who needed convincing that using a civilian doctor as operational bait was justified by potential intelligence gain. Emma sat through it all with the same focused calm she brought to trauma surgery, contributing tactical insights drawn from military experience, refusing to be treated as passive asset rather than active participant. By late afternoon, the plan was approved. Emma would return to Riverside Medical Center tomorrow morning, resume her normal schedule, and operate under what Torres called visible custody, federal protection maintained at observable distance, allowing her targets to feel they had opportunities while actually being comprehensively monitored. What about the drone surveillance? Emma asked. They know where I live. We've cleared your apartment, Kim reported. No electronic devices, no physical intrusions, but we're relocating you to a different unit in the same building, one we've secured and equipped with counter-surveillance measures. Won't that signal that I know I'm being watched? You're a doctor who was threatened. Of course you'd upgrade security. It's the expected response, which makes it perfect cover for not-so-expected monitoring equipment. The new apartment was identical to her old one in layout, but different in every way that mattered. Reinforced door, security cameras disguised as smoke detectors, panic buttons hidden in locations Emma could reach from any room. Federal agents occupied the units above and below, creating a protective sandwich that felt simultaneously secure and claustrophobic. Emma unpacked her small bag, hanging her few clothes in an unfamiliar closet, trying to create normalcy in a space designed for surveillance. Her phone buzzed with messages from colleagues asking if she was okay, from her sister demanding updates, from reporters requesting interviews. She answered the important ones, ignored the rest. At 8 p.m., Torres knocked on her door. Dr. York wants to see you. Says it's urgent. They drove to Riverside Medical Center through evening traffic, Emma acutely aware of the protective vehicles maintaining formation around them, of the armed agents treating a simple trip to the hospital like a military convoy through hostile territory. York was waiting in her office, documents spread across the desk, her expression carrying the weight of discoveries she hadn't wanted to make. "Emma, thank you for coming." She gestured to the chairs. "We need to talk about your employment situation." Emma felt tension coil in her chest. "Are you suspending me?" "No. I'm informing you that 3 board members tried to fire you this afternoon while you were in federal custody. They claimed your continued employment represented unacceptable risk to the hospital." "Tried?" York's expression hardened. "I blocked it. Told them they'd have to fire me first. And if they did, I'd immediately go public with everything I knew about their connections to Thomas Merrick's corruption network." Emma leaned forward. "The board is compromised?" 3 members. Harold Thompson, Margaret Reeves, and Dennis Walsh. All 3 have significant financial ties to shell companies connected to Merrick. Real estate deals, consulting fees, investments that only make sense if you understand they're actually payments for maintaining favorable conditions. Favorable for what? For keeping Riverside dependent on their preferred contractors, for steering county health department resources toward their facilities, for ensuring that medical services remain concentrated in areas they control, rather than expanding to underserved communities. York pulled out a folder. "I've been reviewing budget records since Morrison resigned. The patterns are extensive. We've been overpaying for services, accepting bids from connected companies, denying expansion proposals that would threaten established interests." Torres was already photographing documents. "This is evidence of fraud, conspiracy, corruption in healthcare procurement." "It's more than that," York said. "It's a system. Merrick controls law enforcement through the sheriff's department, controls development through the county planning office, controls healthcare through board influence. He's created a network where every major institution in Hollow Ridge operates according to his interests." Emma thought about the scope of what York was describing. Not just corrupt individuals, but corrupt structures, not just bad actors, but bad systems designed to perpetuate their own power. "How did you find all this?" she asked. "Morrison's files. He kept records of every compromise, every questionable decision, every time the board overruled medical judgment for financial reasons. I think he knew it was wrong, knew someday it would collapse, and he wanted documentation to prove he wasn't the architect." "He was just the facilitator," Emma said. "Exactly. And when the diner incident went viral, when federal investigators started examining Hollow Ridge's institutions, Morrison realized he was the sacrificial piece, so he resigned before he could be pushed and left me his files as insurance against being made the sole scapegoat." Torres finished photographing the documents. "Dr. York, you understand this makes you a witness in a federal investigation." "I understand. And I'm prepared to testify. But first," she looked at Emma, "I need to know you're coming back. Because if you disappear into protective custody, if you let them drive you out, those 3 board members will claim victory. They'll say your absence proves you were the problem, and they'll use that narrative to block any reforms." "I'm coming back," Emma said. "Tomorrow morning. Regular shift." York's expression showed relief and concern in equal measure. "Emma, they're not going to stop. Thompson, Reeves, Walsh, they're already coordinating with Merrick, planning their counteroffensive. The moment you walk back into this hospital, you become a target inside our own walls." "Then we make sure those walls have cameras," Torres said. "Federal observers, documentation of every interaction, evidence collection in real time. If they move against Dr. Caldwell, we'll have proof. And if they move against her physically, then they'll learn what happens when you assault a federal asset under active protection." The drive back to Emma's new apartment took them through Hollow Ridge's downtown. Quiet streets, small businesses closing for the night. The kind of picturesque small-town America that existed on postcards and in selective memory. But Emma saw it differently now, saw the structures beneath the surface, the power dynamics hidden behind friendly facades. At 10 p.m., lying in an unfamiliar bed in a secured apartment, Emma's phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. She almost didn't open it, expecting another threat, another attempt at psychological warfare. But something about the timing felt different. The message read, "You don't know me, but Deputy Brennan stopped me 3 years ago. Made me get out of my car, searched it without cause, threatened to arrest me if I complained. I was too scared to report it. Then I saw your video. I'm testifying to federal investigators tomorrow. Thank you for showing me that fighting back was possible. More messages followed over the next hour, each from different numbers, each telling similar stories. A woman who'd been harassed during a traffic stop, a man who'd been detained for hours without charges, a teenager who'd been threatened into signing a false confession. The pattern Deputy Brennan represented was finally visible. Not isolated incidents, but systematic abuse. Not one bad officer, but an entire culture of impunity. Emma forwarded all the messages to Torres, then turned off her phone and tried to sleep. Tomorrow would require every reserve of strength she possessed. Tomorrow would determine whether her stand meant anything beyond personal defiance. Tomorrow she would walk back into the institution that had tried to silence her, surrounded by colleagues who'd either supported or abandoned her, watched by enemies who wanted her gone, and allies who needed her visible. The alarm shattered darkness at 5 a.m. Emma, dressed in clean scrubs, pulled her hair into a practical ponytail, looked at her reflection, and saw someone who'd survived worse than small-town corruption and coordinated intimidation. Torres and her team were waiting in the parking lot. 3 vehicles, 8 agents, enough visible security to send a message without being so overwhelming it looked like military occupation. The drive to Riverside Medical Center felt longer than it was. Emma watched the town wake around her. Delivery trucks, early shift workers, joggers starting their routines. Normal life continuing while underneath, invisible to most people, a battle was being fought for the soul of their institutions. The hospital parking lot held the usual collection of vehicles, but also news vans, their satellite dishes extended, reporters already setting up for what they clearly anticipated would be a significant story. Emma walked through the employee entrance flanked by federal agents, her badge scanning normally, the door opening into corridors she knew by heart. Nurses looked up as she passed. Some smiled, some looked away. A few whispered to each other, conversations stopping as she approached. The emergency department was in morning transition. Night shift wrapping up, day shift taking over, the changeover period when crucial information had to be transmitted perfectly to ensure patient safety. Dr. Parker was at the nurses' station, reviewing charts. He looked up as Emma approached. "Caldwell, you're back." "I'm back." "Good, because we're short-staffed and the overnight was brutal. 3 trauma cases still being monitored, 2 surgical consults pending, and a 17-year-old with appendicitis who's been waiting 2 hours for the OR to clear." It was the most normal thing anyone had said to her in 3 days. No questions about the investigation, no commentary on the threats, no acknowledgement of the federal agents stationed at the department's entrances. Just the immediate, urgent needs of patients who didn't care about politics or corruption. "Let me see the trauma cases," Emma said. The next 6 hours were intensive medicine, assessing wounds, adjusting treatment protocols, coordinating with surgical teams. One of the trauma patients was deteriorating, sepsis setting in from an infection they'd missed during initial treatment. Emma caught it, changed antibiotic coverage, prevented what would have been a preventable death. At noon, during a brief lull, Sarah Mitchell approached her. "Dr. Caldwell, the board members are here. Thompson, Reeves, and Walsh. They're asking to speak with you." Emma glanced at Torres, who was maintaining her position near the department entrance. The agent nodded, permission to proceed but with backup close. The conference room held 3 people who radiated entitled anger. Thompson stood as Emma entered, his face flushed. "Dr. Caldwell, we need to discuss your employment status. Dr. York already informed me that you tried to fire me yesterday." She also explained why that attempt failed. Margaret Reeves, a pinched woman in her 60s wearing pearls and disapproval, leaned forward. "Dr. Caldwell, your continued presence here is disruptive. The federal agents, the media attention, the threats, all of it creates an unsafe environment for our patients and staff. The threats exist because I refuse to let a deputy assault me without consequences. The federal presence exists because local law enforcement has been systematically corrupt. The media attention exists because people care about justice. None of that is my fault." Dennis Walsh, no relation to the federal agent, slammed his hand on the table. "We don't care whose fault it is. We care about protecting this institution, and right now you're a liability we can't afford." Emma remained standing, her voice calm. "No, what you can't afford is me staying here, working publicly, being visible evidence that your attempts at intimidation failed. Because every day I show up, every patient I treat, every shift I complete, It demonstrates that your power has limits. You arrogant, Thompson started. I have documentation, Emma interrupted, of your financial connections to Thomas Merrick's shell companies. I have evidence of board decisions that prioritized your profits over patient care. I have testimony from Dr. York about how you tried to fire me to protect those interests. And I have federal investigators who are very interested in all of it. The room went silent. Reeves recovered first. Those are serious accusations. Do you have any idea the legal consequences of making false statements? I have every idea, which is why I've been very careful to only state facts that can be proven in court. Emma pulled out her phone, showing them Torres's photographs of the documents. Your contracts, your payments, your votes on procurement decisions, all documented, all evidence. Walsh's face had gone pale. You can't prove those payments were anything other than legitimate business transactions. Maybe not individually, but the pattern, the same companies winning contracts despite higher bids, the same board members voting consistently in their favor, the same financial benefits flowing to the same people, that pattern is what prosecutors call consciousness of guilt. Thompson stood abruptly. We're done here. Dr. Caldwell, you can expect formal disciplinary proceedings within 48 hours. I'll expect federal subpoenas for your testimony within 24, Emma replied. See which arrives first. They left in angry silence, their authority challenged in ways they clearly weren't accustomed to experiencing. Torres entered as they departed. That was risky. That was necessary. They needed to understand that I'm not backing down, not disappearing, not making this easy for them. You also just guaranteed they'll escalate. Good. Because scared people make mistakes, and we need them making mistakes. The afternoon brought more patients, more emergencies, more of the routine chaos that was emergency medicine. But underneath the professional focus, Emma could feel the tension building, board members making phone calls, federal agents coordinating resources. Somewhere in Hollow Ridge, Thomas Merrick receiving reports that his carefully constructed system was collapsing. At 4 p.m., Deputy Collins was discharged from the ICU to a regular floor, his recovery progressing better than expected. His wife stopped by the emergency department to thank Emma again, bringing homemade cookies that Emma shared with the nursing staff. At 5 p.m., Robert Vance, the chemical plant supervisor, was extubated successfully, breathing on his own for the first time since the explosion. His first question was whether Emma had been the one treating him. His second was whether she'd caught whoever caused the explosion. Federal investigators are working on it, Emma told him. You focus on recovery. At 6 p.m., as Emma's shift approached its end, Torres's phone rang. She listened, her expression darkening, then disconnected. County attorney just filed for an emergency injunction barring you from Riverside Medical Center premises. Claims your presence violates safety protocols and creates undue risk to patients. Emma felt anger surge through exhaustion. On what grounds? He doesn't need legitimate grounds. He needs a sympathetic judge. And in Hollow Ridge, judges are elected officials who depend on political support from people like Merrick. So what happens? Emergency hearing tomorrow morning. You'll need to appear, defend your right to work at your own job, convince a judge that Thomas Merrick's attempt to ban you from the hospital is exactly the retaliation it obviously is. Can we win? Torres was quiet for a moment. In a fair system, absolutely. In Hollow Ridge's current system, she shook her head. We're going to need every piece of evidence we have, and we're going to need it presented perfectly. Dr. York appeared in the department, her expression grim. I heard about the injunction. The board is split. Thompson, Reeves, and Walsh are supporting it. The other members are opposing. It's going to come down to the judge's ruling. Who's the judge? Emma asked. Samuel Porter. He's been on the bench for 20 years, appointed back when Merrick's political influence was at its peak. But he's also known for being fair, for following the law even when it's politically inconvenient. So there's a chance. There's always a chance. The question is whether chance is enough. Emma drove back to her secured apartment that evening, thinking about the hearing tomorrow, about standing in a courtroom defending her right to do her job, about how a simple refusal to show ID had cascaded into federal investigations and judicial proceedings. Her phone buzzed. Text from Colonel Harrison. The people targeting you won't stop because of court rulings. They'll stop when they're eliminated or when you are. Choose your battles carefully. She didn't respond. Another text from her sister. Mom saw the news. She's worried. Call her? Emma did, spending 20 minutes reassuring her mother that she was safe, that federal agents were protecting her, that everything would be fine. Lies wrapped in optimism, hope packaged as certainty. At 9 p.m., lying in bed reviewing legal briefs Torres had sent her, Emma's phone rang. Unknown number. She answered on speaker, Torres listening from the monitoring station in the apartment above. Dr. Caldwell. The voice was distorted, the same filter as before. You've made this much harder than it needed to be. Then stop, Emma said simply. Stop the threats. Stop the intimidation. Turn yourself in to federal authorities. You don't understand. This isn't about you anymore. It's about what you represent. Federal interference, outside authority, disrupting local arrangements that have worked for decades. Worked for whom? For people like Merrick? For corrupt officials? For everyone who benefited from a system that let deputies assault civilians without consequences? For everyone who understood that order requires authority and authority requires respect? You broke that compact. You showed that local power could be challenged, that federal resources could override community decisions. You made resistance look possible. It is possible. And that's why you have to be removed. Not killed. That would make you a martyr. But discredited, driven out, transformed from hero to cautionary tale. The injunction is just the beginning. By the time we're done, your career will be destroyed, your reputation ruined, your story turned into a warning about what happens when outsiders challenge established order. The line went dead. Torres was already tracing the call. Same pattern, burner phone, bounced signal. But Emma, she paused. They're not hiding anymore. They're explaining their strategy, confident that knowing won't help you stop it. Because they think they've already won, Emma said. They think the injunction will succeed, the judge will rule against me, and I'll be forced out regardless of federal protection. So we prove them wrong. How? Torres was quiet for a long moment. By making sure Judge Porter sees exactly what this is, not a safety concern, but a coordinated attack on someone who threatened corrupt power. By documenting every connection, every payment, every phone call between Merrick and the board members. By presenting evidence so overwhelming that even a sympathetic judge can't ignore it. We have until tomorrow morning. Then we work tonight. The next 8 hours were intensive investigation. Federal agents pulling financial records, reviewing surveillance footage from the hospital, interviewing witnesses who'd observed board members' behavior. Torres coordinated with prosecutors building cases against Merrick's network, with Walsh gathering evidence of corruption, with York providing internal hospital documentation. Emma reviewed it all, her medical training helping her see patterns in the data, the way certain contractors always got approved regardless of cost, the way certain expansion proposals always got denied regardless of need, the way resources flowed to wealthy areas while underserved communities received minimal investment. It wasn't just corruption, it was systematic disenfranchisement, economic violence dressed in bureaucratic language. At 5 a.m., Torres called a final briefing. We have enough. Financial connections between Merrick and the board members, documented communications showing coordination, evidence that the injunction is retaliatory rather than safety-based. The question is whether Judge Porter will consider federal evidence in what's technically a local employment dispute. He'll have to, Walsh said, because we're filing our own motion, federal civil rights violation, witness intimidation, conspiracy to obstruct an ongoing investigation. The moment we file, this stops being a simple injunction hearing and becomes part of a larger federal case. Emma looked at the assembled evidence. Months of work compressed into one night, corruption exposed through careful documentation rather than dramatic confrontation. What happens if we lose? She asked. If Porter rules against you, the injunction stands. You'll be barred from Riverside pending further legal proceedings that could take months. During that time, Thompson, Reeves, and Walsh will work to fire you permanently, will use your absence to claim you abandoned your position. And if we win, if Porter sees through the injunction and rules in your favor, it sends a message that judicial authority won't be used to protect corruption. It shows that even in Hollow Ridge, even with Merrick's influence, there are still lines that can't be crossed. The courthouse was already surrounded by media when they arrived at 8 a.m. National news trucks, local reporters, cameras capturing every angle of Emma's arrival. She walked through them, flanked by federal agents, her expression calm, her posture professional. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Thompson, Reeves, and Walsh sat with their attorney, expensive suits and confident expressions. York sat on the opposite side, alone but determined. Federal prosecutors occupied the back rows, their presence a reminder that this hearing was connected to larger investigations. Judge Samuel Porter entered at precisely 9 a.m., a man in his late 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that suggested he'd seen every courtroom trick ever attempted. He took his seat, reviewed the filings, then looked up. This is an emergency hearing regarding a motion for temporary injunction filed by County Attorney Thomas Merrick on behalf of Riverside Medical Center board members Thompson, Reeves, and Walsh. The motion seeks to bar Dr. Emma Caldwell from hospital premises, pending resolution of safety concerns. He paused. I've reviewed the filings from both sides, and I have significant questions. Mr. Merrick, you may proceed. Merrick stood, silver-haired, expensive suit, practiced courtroom presence. Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter of institutional safety. Dr. Caldwell has become the focus of violent threats, federal investigations, and media attention that creates an unacceptable risk environment for patients and staff. The hospital board has a duty to protect. Mr. Merrick, Porter interrupted, has Dr. Caldwell violated any hospital policies? Not directly, but her presence. Has she failed to perform her medical duties? No, Your Honor, but the circumstances. Has she engaged in any conduct that would justify termination or suspension under normal hospital procedures? Merrick hesitated. The situation is extraordinary, Your Honor. Normal procedures don't account for federal protective details, ongoing criminal investigations, and threats of violence. Threats against her, Mr. Merrick, not threats made by her. Porter leaned forward. Help me understand why the victim of violence should be removed from her workplace rather than the perpetrators being prosecuted. Because her continued presence escalates the danger, creates situations where corrupt officials feel threatened by accountability? The voice came from the back of the courtroom. Everyone turned. Sheriff Garrett stood in the doorway, no longer in uniform, wearing civilian clothes but carrying himself with the same authority. Your Honor, I'm testifying under federal subpoena in the investigation of Thomas Merrick's corruption network, and I can provide direct evidence that this injunction is retaliation, not safety. Porter's expression showed surprise quickly masked by judicial neutrality. Sheriff Garrett, you're not scheduled to testify in this hearing. I'm formally offering testimony relevant to these proceedings, Garrett said, if the court will hear it. Merrick was on his feet. Objection! This is a civil matter, not a criminal proceeding. Sheriff Garrett's testimony is directly relevant to the question of whether this injunction is legitimate or retaliatory, Torres interrupted, standing from the gallery. Special Agent Rebecca Torres, Department of Defense Inspector General's Office. Your Honor, we have evidence that Mr. Merrick coordinated with board members Thompson, Reeves, and Walsh to file this injunction specifically to silence Dr. Caldwell's testimony and remove her from public view during our investigation. Porter studied the courtroom, Merrick's carefully constructed case suddenly facing coordinated resistance, federal authority intersecting with local proceedings in ways that clearly complicated his decision. I'm going to hear testimony, he said finally. This injunction raises questions that go beyond simple employment disputes. Sheriff Garrett, approach the stand. The next hour was devastating. Garrett testified about Merrick's corruption network, about the coordination between the county attorney's office and hospital board members, about payments and favors and systematic abuse of authority. Torres presented financial documentation. Walsh provided evidence of communications between Merrick and the board members discussing how to neutralize Emma's influence. Thompson, Reeves, and Walsh sat frozen, their confident expressions eroding into barely concealed panic. Merrick tried to object, to challenge evidence, to redirect testimony, but Porter allowed it all, his sharp eyes tracking every revelation, every connection, every piece of the larger pattern being exposed. Finally, Porter called a recess. I need to review the evidence presented. We'll reconvene in 1 hour. The courtroom emptied into hallways buzzing with speculation. Emma stood with Torres and York, feeling the weight of waiting, of uncertainty. How did it look? She asked. Like Porter realizes he's not hearing a simple injunction case, Torres said. Like he understands that his ruling will either enable corruption or help dismantle it. 63 minutes later, they reconvened. Porter took his seat, his expression unreadable. I've reviewed all testimony and evidence presented this morning. This court finds that the motion for injunction is not supported by legitimate safety concerns, but rather represents an attempt to retaliate against Dr. Caldwell for exercising her legal rights and cooperating with federal investigators. The motion is denied. Relief flooded through Emma, but Porter wasn't finished. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the State Attorney General's office for investigation of potential witness intimidation and obstruction of justice. Mr. Merrick, board members Thompson, Reeves, and Walsh, you are ordered to preserve all documents, communications, and financial records related to Dr. Caldwell's employment and this injunction. Any destruction of evidence will be treated as contempt of court and obstruction of a federal investigation. He brought his gavel down. This hearing is adjourned. The courtroom erupted, reporters rushing for exits, federal agents moving to secure evidence, Thompson, Reeves, and Walsh, conferring urgently with their attorney. Merrick stood motionless, his carefully constructed authority crumbling in real time. Emma felt Torres's hand on her shoulder. You won. We all won, Emma replied, looking at Garrett, at York, at the federal agents who'd protected her. Everyone who stood up. Outside the courthouse, media surrounded them. Cameras, microphones, questions shouted from every direction. Emma stood at the center, flanked by federal protection, and gave her first public statement since the diner incident. I'm grateful that Judge Porter saw this injunction for what it was, an attempt to silence someone who refused to accept that authority could be abused without consequences. I look forward to returning to my work at Riverside Medical Center, to serving patients who need care, and to supporting the ongoing investigations into corruption that has harmed this community for too long. Dr. Caldwell, a reporter shouted, are you afraid for your safety? I've been afraid before, in war zones, in trauma bays, in moments where one wrong decision meant someone died. But fear doesn't exempt us from responsibility, and my responsibility is to do my job with integrity, regardless of who that threatens. The questions continued, but Torres moved them toward the vehicles. As they pulled away from the courthouse, Emma's phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. You win this battle, but the war is far from over, and wars have casualties. She showed it to Torres, who was already forwarding it to her team for analysis. They're not backing down, Torres said. Neither am I. The drive back to Riverside Medical Center felt different. Not a return to normal, but a step into whatever came next. The parking lot held the usual vehicles, but now Emma knew which board members had tried to destroy her, which administrators had stood with her, which systems had been designed to protect corruption. She walked through the employee entrance with her badge, with her federal protection, with the knowledge that she'd survived their first major attempt to remove her. Doctor. Parker was waiting in the emergency department. Heard you won. Welcome back. Now, can we please focus on medicine? Because we've got a multi-vehicle pileup coming in, 6 critical patients, and I need your hands. Emma pulled on fresh scrubs, scrubbed in at the sink, let muscle memory take over. The first ambulance arrived 3 minutes later. Teenager with massive trauma, internal bleeding, vitals crashing. Emma moved into the controlled calm of emergency medicine, doing what she did best, what she'd trained for, what no amount of corruption or intimidation could take from her. She saved the teenager, then the next patient, then the next. By the time her shift ended at 11 p.m., she'd treated 14 critical cases, performed 2 emergency surgeries, and demonstrated exactly why removing her from Riverside would have been not just retaliation, but medical malpractice. Torres was waiting when she emerged from the locker room. You need to see this. She showed Emma her phone. Breaking news. County Attorney Thomas Merrick arrested on federal charges of conspiracy, witness intimidation, and obstruction of justice. Additional arrests expected within 48 hours. Emma stared at the headline, feeling not triumph, but tired satisfaction. One victory in a longer battle, one corrupt official facing consequences in a system that needed comprehensive reform. What about Thompson, Reeves, and Walsh? Board accepted their resignations an hour ago. Dr. York is assembling a new board with proper oversight and ethics requirements. And the threats? The surveillance? Whoever made those calls? Torres's expression darkened. Still active, still dangerous. Just because Merrick is in custody doesn't mean his network is dismantled. Some of them might back down now that federal prosecution is real. But others, she paused, others might escalate, might see this as their last chance to eliminate a threat before the whole structure collapses. Emma's phone buzzed one final time that night. Unknown number. She answered, expecting another threat, another promise of violence. Instead, a voice she recognized, distorted before but now clear and familiar. "Hello, Dr. Caldwell. We should meet. There's something you need to understand about why you were really sent to Hollow Ridge 2 years ago. And who's been watching you the entire time?" The line went dead before Emma could respond. Emma lowered the phone slowly, her hand steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. The voice had been clear, undistorted, deliberate. Someone who dropped their disguise because they wanted to be recognized or because they no longer cared about hiding. Torres was already tracking the call, her fingers flying across her tablet. Signal originated from inside Hollow Ridge. Stationary location, not a mobile device. Whoever made that call is close and waiting for you to respond. "Did you get the location?" Triangulating now. Torres looked up, her expression grim. "Emma, this could be the final trap. Everything that's happened, the diner incident, the explosion, the injunction, it could all have been designed to bring you to exactly this moment. Or it could be someone ready to provide intelligence that exposes the entire network," Emma countered. "Someone who knows the structure is collapsing and wants to negotiate before they're buried with it." Foster entered the apartment, his weapon holstered but his posture alert. "We've got movement on surveillance. 2 vehicles approaching Dr. Caldwell's old apartment building, occupants unknown. They're not trying to hide, parking in plain view, exiting without concealment." Kim pulled up camera feeds on the main monitor. Emma watched 4 figures emerge from the vehicles. 3 men and 1 woman, all wearing civilian clothes but moving with coordinated precision that spoke of professional training. They weren't hiding, they weren't surveilling, they were making a statement. "Facial recognition?" Torres asked. Kim ran the images through federal databases. 2 matches: Jason Vance, former Army intelligence, dishonorable discharge 5 years ago for selling classified information, currently listed as private security contractor, and Michael Brennan. "Relation to Deputy Marcus Brennan?" Emma interrupted. "Older brother, former sheriff's deputy himself, resigned 8 years ago under investigation for excessive force. No criminal charges filed, but the pattern matches Marcus's behavior perfectly." Torres studied the screen. "They're not here by accident, and they're not working alone. 4 operatives means larger organizational support, probably the remnants of Merrick's network trying to salvage what they can." Emma's phone buzzed, text from the same unknown number. "The old Riverside Medical Center building on Maple Street. 20 minutes. Come alone, or you'll never learn the truth about why you're really in Hollow Ridge." She showed Torres the message. "Absolutely not," Torres said immediately. "That's textbook ambush setup. Isolated location, time pressure, demand that you arrive without protection." "What's the old medical center building?" Emma asked. York's voice came from the doorway. She'd been escorted up by federal agents after the courthouse victory. "It's the original hospital facility, abandoned 15 years ago when Riverside built the new campus. The building's been empty since, supposed to be demolished, but kept getting delayed due to funding issues and permits. Permits that Thomas Merrick controlled through the county planning office," Kim said, pulling up property records. "The building's owned by a shell company that traces back to the same network we've been investigating. They've been keeping it maintained minimally, paying utilities, preventing complete deterioration." Emma studied the property schematics Kim displayed. 3 stories, multiple access points, basement level, surrounded by vacant lots that had once been parking areas. Perfect for surveillance, for control, for ensuring no witnesses to whatever happened inside. "They've been using it," Emma said, "as a meeting place, a storage facility, maybe a base of operations for activities they couldn't conduct in public view. Which means it's familiar territory to them and completely unknown to us," Foster added. "Every tactical advantage goes to whoever's waiting inside." Torres was coordinating with her team, deploying resources, establishing perimeters. "If you're seriously considering this, and I strongly advise against it, we'd need extensive preparation. Building schematics, entry team rehearsals, surveillance coverage, emergency extraction protocols." "We don't have time for extensive preparation," Emma said. "They gave us 20 minutes and we've already used 5 of them talking. Either I go and we find out what they know, or I don't, and we lose potential intelligence that could identify everyone involved in this network. Or you go and you don't come back, Torres said bluntly. Emma, these aren't corrupt bureaucrats filing paperwork. These are professionals with military training who've already demonstrated willingness to cause mass casualties. The chemical plant explosion could have killed dozens. They chose to calibrate it, but that doesn't mean they'll exercise the same restraint with you. Emma thought about the past week, the diner confrontation, the hospital politics, the federal investigation, the courtroom victory. Every step had been reactive, responding to threats and attacks initiated by others. This was the first opportunity to take offensive action, to force the confrontation on her terms rather than theirs. What if I'm not alone? She asked. What if I go in wired for surveillance, with tactical teams positioned for immediate response, with every word and action documented in real time? Torres was quiet for a moment, calculation playing across her face. You're talking about turning yourself into operational bait again, deliberately walking into danger to force them to expose themselves. I'm talking about finishing this, because as long as they're out there, as long as this network exists, I'm not safe. None of us are. They'll keep trying different approaches, different attacks, different ways to eliminate the threat I represent. York stepped forward. Emma, you've already done more than anyone could expect. You've exposed corruption, survived assassination attempts, won in court against impossible odds. You don't have to keep fighting. Yes, I do, because if I stop now, if I accept that survival is enough, then everyone who comes after me faces the same threats. The next person who refuses to comply, who stands up to abuse, who demands accountability, they'll be targeted by whatever remains of this network. I have to dismantle it completely, not just survive it. Walsh entered the apartment, her expression carrying the weight of new intelligence. We've identified the voice from the phone call, ran it through voice recognition databases, matched it against military personnel records. The caller is Colonel David Harrison. The room went silent. DIA Harrison? Torres demanded. The same colonel who tried to take Emma into custody at the grain elevator? Confirmed. Voice print is 97% match. Walsh pulled up Harrison's file. Which means this entire situation is more complicated than local corruption. If Harrison's involved, if he's been orchestrating events from inside DIA oversight, then my assignment to Hollow Ridge 2 years ago wasn't random, Emma finished. Someone placed me here deliberately, knowing about the corruption, anticipating that I'd eventually confront it. The implications cascaded through her mind like dominoes falling. Her job offer at Riverside arriving unexpectedly, the position perfectly matching her qualifications, the timing coinciding with her departure from military service. She'd thought it was fortunate placement, an opportunity to rebuild civilian life in a quiet town where her past wouldn't follow her. But what if her past had followed her deliberately? What if Hollow Ridge had been chosen specifically because its corruption network connected to larger intelligence operations that Harrison wanted exposed or protected? We need to bring Harrison in for questioning, Foster said. On what charges? Walsh countered. Making a phone call? We have no evidence he's committed any crimes. And if he's operating under classified authorities, we might not have jurisdiction regardless. Emma's tactical mind was already working through scenarios, analyzing Harrison's position and motivations. He wants a meeting because something's changed. The courtroom victory, Merrick's arrest, the network's exposure. It's created a situation he didn't anticipate or couldn't control. He needs to recalibrate, and he thinks I'm the key to doing that. Or he wants you dead, and this is the cleanest way to accomplish it, Torres said. Emma, I can't authorize you walking into a meeting with a DIA colonel who might be orchestrating attempts on your life. You can't authorize it. But you can't stop me either. I'm not under arrest. I'm not in military custody. I'm a civilian making a choice about my own safety. Torres looked at Walsh, at Foster, at York. All of them showed concern mixed with resignation. They'd learned over the past week that Emma didn't accept authority that contradicted her own judgment. Fine, Torres said finally, but we do this intelligently. You wear a wire. We position tactical teams at every exit. At the first sign of threat, we extract you by force regardless of what intelligence might be lost. Agreed? Agreed. The next 12 minutes were intensive preparation. Emma fitted with a wire hidden in her clothing, earpiece disguised as a hearing aid, panic button concealed in her watch. Tactical teams deployed to positions surrounding the old hospital building, snipers establishing overwatch on nearby structures, drones providing aerial surveillance. Torres briefed her one final time. You go in, you listen to whatever Harrison has to say, you document it, and you get out. No heroics, no attempts to confront or apprehend. Your job is intelligence gathering, nothing more. Understood? The drive to the old Riverside Medical Center took 7 minutes through empty streets. Hollow Ridge settling into night, unaware that in an abandoned building on Maple Street, the final confrontation was about to unfold. The structure loomed against dark sky. 3 stories of weathered brick and broken windows, chain-link fence surrounding the property, weeds reclaiming the parking lot. Lights burned in second-floor windows, visible evidence that someone was maintaining power to the building. Emma parked where instructed in the circular drive that had once welcomed ambulances and emergency vehicles. The main entrance stood open, doors propped wide in apparent invitation. She could hear Torres in her earpiece. All teams in position. Building is surrounded. We have thermal imaging showing 5 people inside, 4 on the ground floor, 1 on the second floor in what looks like a former administrative office. Copy, Emma said quietly. She walked through the entrance into a lobby that time had ravaged. Tile floors cracked and stained, ceiling panels missing, walls showing water damage and graffiti. But electricity still worked, fluorescent lights flickering overhead, creating shadows that moved with unsettling life. Footsteps echoed from the corridor ahead. Emma's hand moved instinctively toward the panic button, but she forced herself to remain calm, to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. Jason Vance appeared first, the former Army intelligence officer Kim had identified, now clearly working as enforcement for whoever was coordinating this meeting. He held no visible weapon, but his stance suggested immediate access to one. Dr. Caldwell, this way. She followed him through corridors lined with abandoned equipment, gurneys rusted in place, old monitors with shattered screens, supply cabinets picked clean by salvagers. The building felt haunted not by ghosts but by memories of lives saved and lost in spaces now surrendered to decay. They climbed stairs to the second floor, Vance maintaining position behind her, close enough to control, far enough to react if she tried anything unexpected. The administrative wing was in better condition than the lower levels, suggesting regular maintenance and use. Colonel Harrison waited in what had once been the hospital administrator's office. He sat behind a desk that looked incongruously professional in the abandoned building, files spread before him, reading glasses perched on his nose like this was a routine briefing rather than a clandestine meeting. He looked up as Emma entered. Dr. Caldwell, thank you for coming. Did I have a choice? Everyone has choices. The question is whether they understand the consequences of those choices before making them. Harrison gestured to the chair across from his desk. Please sit. Emma remained standing. You said I needed to understand why I was sent to Hollow Ridge, so explain. Harrison removed his glasses, folding them carefully. 6 years ago, during your final deployment, you treated casualties from Operation Crimson Shepherd. Do you remember that operation? Emma's blood went cold. Crimson Shepherd had been her authorization code during the phone call to federal authorities. Harrison using it now was deliberate provocation, demonstrating knowledge he shouldn't possess about classified military operations. I remember treating soldiers, she said carefully. I didn't always know operational details. But you knew those soldiers had been extracting intelligence assets from a compromised location. You knew they'd been wounded by people who should have been allies. You knew the operation had exposed a corruption network that extended into U.S. military contractor operations. I knew my job was saving lives, not asking questions about politics. Harrison stood, walking to the window overlooking Hollow Ridge's darkened streets. That corruption network wasn't dismantled, Dr. Caldwell. It was redirected. Some assets were prosecuted publicly, others were turned, used to feed intelligence back to us about foreign operations. And a very few, were allowed to continue operating under observation because the intelligence they provided was deemed more valuable than the damage they caused. Emma felt pieces clicking together with horrible clarity. Thomas Merrick, his network, it was connected to the military contractor corruption. Merrick was a financial facilitator. He moved money, created shell companies, provided infrastructure for operations that needed to appear legitimate. His usefulness ended when you exposed him publicly, when federal prosecution became inevitable. So you sacrificed him. I repositioned assets according to changing operational priorities. Merrick's value was information. and once that information was secured, his continued operation became a liability. Harrison turned to face her. Just as your continued public presence is becoming a liability, Torres's voice came through Emma's earpiece. That's a direct threat. We're moving in. But Harrison continued before Emma could respond. You were placed in Hollow Ridge because we needed someone inside Merrick's sphere of influence who wouldn't be suspected of intelligence gathering. A doctor, civilian, no obvious connections to ongoing operations. You were perfect, qualified, professional, someone who'd blend into a small-town hospital without raising suspicions. You used me as an unwitting intelligence asset. I positioned you where you could be most effective. What happened at the diner, the confrontation with Deputy Brennan, that was unexpected. But it created opportunities we couldn't have engineered deliberately. It exposed connections, forced coordination between disparate elements of Merrick's network, documented activities we'd been trying to prove for years. Emma heard movement in the hallway. Tactical teams entering the building, establishing positions. But she needed Harrison to keep talking, to confess enough that his admissions couldn't be denied or classified away. The chemical plant explosion, she said. You knew about it beforehand. Harrison's expression didn't change. We knew someone would attempt a distraction. The timing and method were predicted within acceptable parameters. Acceptable parameters? People were hurt. Lives were endangered. And all survived, treated by the very doctor whose presence we'd arranged. The casualties created sympathy, reinforced your victim narrative, strengthened federal justification for expanded investigation. Harrison's voice carried no emotion, just cold operational assessment. Every element served multiple purposes, Dr. Caldwell. That's what good intelligence work accomplishes. The office door burst open. Torres entered with her weapon drawn, federal agents flooding the room. Colonel Harrison, you're under arrest for conspiracy, reckless endangerment, and unauthorized intelligence operations on U.S. soil. Harrison didn't resist. He simply smiled. Agent Torres, I'm operating under classified authorities signed by people several levels above your clearance. You can arrest me, but those charges won't survive judicial review. We'll see about that. Torres secured Harrison's hands behind his back while Foster cleared the room for additional threats. The 4 operatives downstairs had been detained without resistance. They'd known tactical teams were surrounding the building, had apparently been instructed not to resist federal arrest. Emma stood motionless, processing Harrison's confession. She'd been manipulated from the beginning, positioned like a chess piece in operations she hadn't consented to participate in. Every choice she'd made, every stand she'd taken, had served purposes beyond her knowledge or control. Walsh entered the office, her expression grim. We've searched the building, found extensive files documenting Merrick's network, financial records, communications logs. This wasn't just a meeting location, it was an intelligence archive. Harrison's insurance, Emma said quietly. Documentation he could use to justify his actions or implicate others if his authorization was ever challenged. Harrison, being escorted toward the exit by federal agents, paused. Dr. Caldwell, you should understand. Everything I did because you were capable of it. Lesser assets would have broken under the pressure, would have fled or compromised. You stood. You fought. You accomplished exactly what was needed. That's not manipulation. That's recognition of exceptional capability. You endangered my life. I positioned you where your capabilities could achieve maximum impact. There's a difference. Torres pulled Harrison away before Emma could respond. The office emptied, leaving her alone with the files Harrison had been reviewing. Documentation of 2 years of observation, of decisions made about her life without her knowledge, of operations conducted through her presence. She picked up one file at random. Inside were photographs of her daily routines, arriving at work, buying groceries, eating at the Crossroads Diner, surveillance spanning months, maybe years, every movement tracked and analyzed. The violation felt more intimate than the physical threats she'd survived. Someone had been watching every moment, evaluating every decision, using her life as raw material for intelligence operations. York found Emma still in the office 20 minutes later, surrounded by evidence of her unwitting participation in federal operations. Emma, Torres says we need to clear the building. Structural engineers are concerned about safety. Emma looked at the older woman. Did you know that I was placed at Riverside deliberately? York was quiet for a moment. I knew your application seemed too perfect. Your qualifications, your timing, the way Morrison pushed for your immediate hiring despite budget constraints. I suspected someone had arranged it, but I thought it was professional networking, not intelligence operations. So we were both manipulated. We were both used. The question is what we do now that we know. Emma gathered the files, documentation she'd need for whatever legal proceedings followed Harrison's arrest. The building creaked around them, old structure protesting new attention, decades of abandonment disturbed by sudden activity. They descended to the ground floor where federal agents were cataloging evidence, processing the detained operatives, securing the facility. Torres approached Emma as she exited into cool night air. Harrison's claiming classified authority for everything, Torres said. His lawyers are already filing motions invoking national security exemptions, arguing that any prosecution would require disclosure of methods and sources that can't be revealed publicly. So he'll walk, Emma said flatly. Maybe. Or maybe his superiors decide he's become a liability and let him face consequences to protect their own positions. Intelligence agencies eat their own when it's politically convenient. Emma thought about Harrison's confidence, his certainty that authority would shield him from accountability. She'd seen that same confidence in Marcus Brennan's face when he'd grabbed her arm in the diner. She'd watched it crumble under the weight of documentation and witness testimony. We have his confession on tape, she said. Every word recorded, transmitted to federal servers in real time. Even if classified authorities protect him from criminal prosecution, that recording proves he knowingly endangered civilian lives for intelligence operations. That's a violation of protocols that even the intelligence community can't ignore. Torres nodded slowly. You're right, and if we leak that recording to oversight committees, to Congressional Intelligence Review, then Harrison's superiors have to choose between protecting him and protecting themselves. And institutional self-preservation always wins. They returned to the federal safe house in the early hours of morning, Emma exhausted but unable to sleep. She sat in the secured apartment reviewing files recovered from Harrison's archive, connecting patterns she'd missed while living through them. The job offer from Riverside had come 3 days after she'd separated from military service. Morrison's enthusiasm for hiring her despite budget concerns had seemed flattering at the time. Her apartment placement, her integration into hospital routines, even her habit of eating at the Crossroads Diner late at night, all of it orchestrated or observed or both. But Harrison had made one critical miscalculation. He'd assumed that controlling her placement meant controlling her actions. He'd thought positioning her in Hollow Ridge would make her his asset, someone whose responses could be predicted and utilized. He hadn't anticipated that she'd refuse to comply with Deputy Brennan's unlawful detention. Hadn't expected that she'd have resources to fight back. Hadn't calculated that her refusal to be victimized would trigger cascading exposure of the entire network he'd been managing. Emma's phone buzzed at 6 a.m. Text from Dr. York. Emergency board meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. They want you there. The new Riverside Medical Center board, assembled hastily after Thompson, Reeves, and Walsh's resignations, occupied the same conference room where Emma had been threatened with suspension just days earlier. But the faces around the table were different now. The atmosphere transformed from hostile to uncertain. York sat at the head of the table, her interim CEO position apparently being formalized. She stood as Emma entered. Dr. Caldwell, thank you for coming. I know you've had an extraordinarily difficult night. Emma took a seat, aware of federal agents stationed outside the conference room of the weight of recent revelations hanging over everything. A board member Emma didn't recognize, a woman in her 40s introduced as Dr. Patricia Morrison, no relation to the former CEO, spoke first. Dr. Caldwell, we've reviewed the files recovered from the old hospital building, the documentation of how you were placed at Riverside, the surveillance, the intelligence operations. On behalf of this board, I want to apologize. You should never have been used without your knowledge or consent. Apologies don't undo what happened, Emma said. No, they don't, which is why we're implementing comprehensive reforms, new ethics oversight, mandatory reporting of any suspicious placement or hiring pressure, protection for staff who report irregularities. We're also establishing a victim support fund for anyone harmed by the corruption network that operated through this hospital. York added, and we're offering you a formal position as Director of Trauma Services. Permanent appointment, significant salary increase, autonomy to restructure the department according to best practices rather than budget politics. Emma studied their faces, looking for signs of manipulation, of new agendas hiding behind apparent reform. But she saw only exhaustion and genuine determination to rebuild what corruption had damaged. "I'll need guarantees," she said. "Written contracts specifying that I can't be terminated or reassigned without cause that would survive judicial review. Protection against any future attempts at retaliation, whether from remnants of Merrick's network or new political pressures." "Already drafted," York said, sliding documents across the table. "Our legal team worked through the night. Everything you specified, plus additional protections we thought necessary given what you've survived." Emma read through the contract carefully, her military training and recent experiences making her skeptical of promises that looked too good to challenge. But the language was clear, the protections comprehensive, the terms more favorable than she'd expected. "Why?" she asked. "Why offer this now?" Patricia Morrison answered. "Because this hospital needs to demonstrate that standing up to corruption is rewarded, not punished. Because we need leaders who've proven they can't be intimidated or bought. And because, frankly, you're an exceptional trauma surgeon whose skills we can't afford to lose." York leaned forward. "Emma, you've been manipulated and used. You have every right to walk away, to find a position somewhere without this history. But if you stay, if you help us rebuild Riverside into an institution that actually serves its community rather than exploiting it, that would be the most powerful statement possible about resilience and reform." Emma thought about leaving, about finding a quiet position in another town where her past wouldn't follow and her face wouldn't be recognized. The appeal was undeniable: anonymity, safety, normal life without federal protection and death threats. But leaving would abandon everyone who'd stood with her: Sarah Mitchell and the other nurses who'd supported her, Dr. Parker, who'd defended her professional competence, York, who'd risked her own position, Sheriff Garrett, who'd chosen truth despite personal cost, and it would abandon the next person who needed someone to have already fought the battles they were facing. "I'll stay," Emma said, "but not just as Director of Trauma Services. I want authority to review all department policies for corruption indicators, to flag problematic practices, to serve as internal advocate for staff who face retaliation or abuse." "Done," York said immediately. "We'll create a formal position, institutional ethics advocate, reporting directly to the CEO and board, with protection from dismissal except for documented cause." They finalized details for the next 2 hours: contract terms, implementation schedules, structural reforms that would take months to fully execute. By the time Emma left the conference room, she'd transformed from threatened employee to protected leader with authority to reshape the institution that had tried to silence her. Torres was waiting in the hallway. "Heard you're staying. Heard you arrested Colonel Harrison," and watched him get released 6 hours later when Pentagon lawyers showed up with classified authorities. Torres's frustration was evident. He's back in Washington, probably filing reports about operational outcomes and asset management. "But the recording of his confession is with congressional oversight committees," Emma said, "and the Intelligence Inspector General, and several journalists who specialize in classified program exposure." Torres smiled slightly. "Funny how recordings get distributed so widely when federal evidence storage has so many access points. Funny how accountability finds ways to work even when official channels are blocked." They walked through the hospital corridors, Emma's badge now carrying new authority, her presence generating recognition rather than suspicion. Nurses nodded as she passed. Residents asked professional questions. Patients in the emergency department received care from a doctor who'd survived assassination attempts to continue serving them. At 3 p.m., Deputy Marcus Brennan's trial began in federal court. Not the local courthouse where Judge Porter had ruled, but a larger venue with jurisdiction over civil rights violations and federal criminal charges. Emma attended with Torres, sitting in the gallery as prosecutors presented the case built from body cam footage, witness testimony, and the 12 other incidents of misconduct that had been documented. Brennan's attorney tried to argue excessive force wasn't intended, that his client had feared for his safety, that split-second judgments in tense situations deserved understanding rather than prosecution. But the footage was damning, the witnesses were credible, and the pattern of behavior across years of service demonstrated not isolated mistakes, but systematic abuse. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: assault under color of authority, civil rights violations, conspiracy with other officers to cover up misconduct. Brennan sat motionless as the verdicts were read, his face drained of color, his career and freedom ending in a courtroom packed with the people he'd victimized. Emma felt no satisfaction in his conviction, only tired acknowledgement that consequences had finally found someone who'd operated without them for too long. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. Prosecutors were requesting significant prison time plus permanent prohibition from law enforcement employment. Brennan would likely serve years in federal custody, his authority stripped permanently, his name becoming cautionary tale rather than protected asset. Sheriff Garrett, testifying under immunity deal for his cooperation, provided details about the department's culture, how officers like Brennan were rewarded for aggressive policing, how complaints were dismissed or buried, how residents learned to accept abuse rather than fight back because fighting back only made situations worse. His testimony dismantled the few bad apples defense, exposing institutional rot that had allowed those apples to spoil the entire barrel. The trial concluded at 7 p.m. Emma left the courthouse surrounded by supporters who'd gathered to witness accountability, residents who'd been victimized by Brennan, activists who'd campaigned for reform, journalists documenting the trial for national audiences. A young woman approached Emma as she walked to her car. "Dr. Caldwell, I'm Jessica Martinez. Deputy Brennan stopped me 2 years ago. Made me get out of my car in the rain, searched everything, never explained why. I was too scared to report it because I thought no one would believe me." "Did you testify?" Emma asked. "This afternoon. Told the jury everything, and they believed me." Jessica's eyes were bright with emotion. "Because you showed it was possible to fight back. Because you proved that standing up to abuse could actually lead to justice instead of just more abuse." Emma wanted to tell her that justice was complicated, that victories were partial, that systems changed slowly and imperfectly. But Jessica didn't need complexity right now. She needed validation that her courage in testifying had mattered. "Thank you for your testimony," Emma said. "It helped build the case, helped show the pattern, helped make sure this doesn't happen to someone else." Over the next 3 weeks, the cascade of accountability continued. Thomas Merrick's trial began, his corruption network exposed in detail that made national headlines. 4 other county officials were indicted. 17 sheriff's deputies were suspended pending investigation. The entire structure that had operated with impunity for decades faced comprehensive dismantlement. Not everyone faced consequences. Some had immunity for cooperation, some had connections that shielded them, some had simply been skilled enough at covering tracks that evidence remained circumstantial. But enough people faced real penalties that the message was unmistakable. The old arrangements were over, and the new reality would require different behavior. Colonel Harrison resigned from DYA under pressure from congressional oversight committees who'd reviewed his confession recording. His resignation statement cited personal reasons and thanked colleagues for years of dedicated service. The real reasons, unauthorized operations, reckless endangerment, manipulation of civilian assets, weren't mentioned publicly, but everyone involved understood the subtext. Emma received a formal letter from the Department of Defense thanking her for her service and officially terminating her consultant status and security clearance. The letter was professional, courteous, and clearly designed to sever all official connections that might require ongoing federal responsibility for her well-being. She didn't mind. Federal protection had been necessary during acute danger, but she'd never wanted to be anyone's permanent asset or ongoing obligation. 6 weeks after the diner incident, Emma stood in Riverside Medical Center's newly renovated trauma department. Updated equipment, improved protocols, structural changes funded by emergency appropriations, secured after the corruption exposure. Dr. York had fought for the funding, arguing that the hospital needed to demonstrate tangible commitment to reform rather than just rhetoric. Sarah Mitchell approached with a patient chart. "Dr. Caldwell, we've got incoming trauma. Multi-vehicle accident on Route 29, 3 critical, ETA 5 minutes. Emma reviewed the preliminary information, already calculating resource allocation, personnel assignments, treatment priorities. This was what she did. This was who she was. Not federal asset or political symbol or corruption fighter, but doctor whose skills saved lives regardless of the circumstances that brought people into her care. The ambulances arrived. Emma moved into the controlled urgency of trauma response, directing teams, making split-second decisions, fighting for patients who didn't know her history and didn't need to care. They needed her competence, her training, her absolute refusal to accept that any situation was hopeless until every option had been exhausted. She saved all 3 critical patients that night. At midnight, finally heading home after another 17-hour shift, Emma found Dr. York waiting in the parking lot. "Little late for administrative meetings," Emma said. "I wanted to give you this personally." York handed her an envelope. "Official confirmation. Director of Trauma Services and Institutional Ethics Advocate. Your reforms are being implemented across all departments. And the board voted to establish an annual award in your name, the Emma Caldwell Award for Professional Courage, recognizing staff who stand against institutional pressure to do what's right." Emma opened the envelope, reading the formal appointment letter. The salary was generous, the authority comprehensive, the protections exactly what she'd negotiated. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you," York corrected, "for not giving up, for not letting them intimidate you into silence, for proving that one person refusing to accept abuse can trigger changes that affect thousands." Emma drove to her apartment, not the secured federal facility but her original unit, reclaimed after surveillance equipment had been removed and security upgraded with hospital funding rather than government resources. The space felt like hers again, no longer contaminated by unseen observation. She made coffee, stood at the window looking out at Hollow Ridge's quiet streets, thought about the journey from that first night at the Crossroads Diner to this moment of hard-won stability. Her phone buzzed, text from her sister. Saw the news about Brennan's sentencing, 15 years federal prison. "Mom wanted you to know she's proud of you." Emma smiled, texting back, "Tell her I'm proud of her too, for raising someone stubborn enough to cause this much trouble." Another text from Torres. "Final report filed. Case officially closed." Well, the parts we can close. Harrison's still out there somewhere, probably already working another operation. But for now, you're safe, and that matters. Emma typed back, "Thank you for everything. For protecting me when I probably didn't deserve it." Torres's response came quickly. "You deserved it, and more. Take care of yourself, Dr. Caldwell. The world needs people like you." The messages continued through the evening, colleagues congratulating her on the appointment, former patients thanking her for their care, residents asking when her first ethics training session would be scheduled. The overwhelming support felt strange after weeks of threats and intimidation, but Emma let herself accept it, let herself acknowledge that she'd earned this moment of recognition. At 1 a.m., lying in bed reviewing the next day's surgical schedule, Emma's phone rang one final time. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, exhausted and ready for sleep, but something made her pick up. "Dr. Caldwell." The voice was young, female, nervous. "I'm calling because I saw your story about refusing to show ID to the deputy, about fighting back. And I wanted to tell you that I'm in a similar situation now. A police officer pulled me over tonight for no reason, demanded I get out of my car, started searching it without permission. I thought about what you did, how you stood up for your rights. So I recorded everything on my phone and I asked if I was being detained. And when he couldn't give me a reason, I told him I wanted to leave. And he let me go." Emma sat up, fully alert now. "Are you safe?" "I'm home now. I'm okay. I wanted you to know that your story helped me, that seeing someone refuse to accept abuse made me realize I didn't have to accept it either." "Did you file a complaint?" "I'm going to, tomorrow. And I'm not afraid anymore because I saw what happened when you weren't afraid." They talked for 20 minutes, Emma providing practical advice about documentation, about filing formal complaints, about resources available to people facing police misconduct. When the call ended, Emma sat in darkness thinking about cascade effects, how one person's resistance created permission for others to resist, how visibility of successful defiance inspired more defiance, how individual courage compounded into collective change. She'd fought her battle not knowing whether it would matter beyond her own situation. But now she understood that every person who stood up, every victim who refused to stay silent, every instance of accountability achieved, all of it built momentum that made the next fight slightly easier, the next victory slightly more achievable. The next morning, Emma returned to Riverside Medical Center to find reporters waiting at the entrance. Not the hostile confrontation of weeks earlier, but professional journalists covering the hospital's transformation, documenting reforms, interviewing staff about institutional changes. One reporter approached as Emma entered. "Dr. Caldwell, you've become a symbol for people fighting institutional abuse. What would you say to someone facing a similar situation?" Emma thought about the question, about all the easy answers she could give, about inspirational platitudes that would sound good in news clips. Instead, she said, "I'd tell them it's going to be hard, that standing up to abuse costs something, that there will be moments when it feels like fighting is making everything worse, that support won't always come from expected places. But I'd also tell them that silence has cost too, the cost of accepting that power can be abused without consequences, the cost of teaching the next generation that compliance is safer than resistance, the cost of living with yourself knowing you had a chance to demand better and chose comfort instead. Do you have any regrets about how you handled the situation?" "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that a simple traffic stop at a diner required federal intervention to resolve. I regret that so many people were harmed by systems that should have protected them. But I don't regret refusing to show my ID when I hadn't broken any laws, because that refusal wasn't about me. It was about every person who comes after me, who'll face similar situations, who need to know that resistance is possible and that justice, however imperfect, can still be achieved." The interview concluded. Emma went inside to her new office, larger space, better equipment, the title Director of Trauma Services and Institutional Ethics Advocate on the door nameplate. She had surgery scheduled at 10 a.m., ethics training at 2 p.m., and a meeting with the board at 4 p.m. to discuss expanding trauma protocols. Normal work in an institution that was slowly, imperfectly, genuinely trying to become better than it had been. Sarah Mitchell knocked on her door at 9:45. "Doctor Caldwell, your surgical patient is prepped and ready. Also," she hesitated, "I wanted to thank you for everything. I've been a nurse for 2 years, and I was starting to think that corruption and abuse were just how hospitals worked. You showed me that someone could fight it and win. That matters more than you probably realize." Emma stood, gathering her surgical materials. "It matters because you'll fight the next battle, and the person after you will fight the one after that. That's how systems change, not through one dramatic victory, but through constant resistance by people who refuse to accept that abuse is inevitable." The surgery went perfectly. Complicated abdominal repair that required precise technique and careful decision-making. Emma worked with focused intensity, her hands steady, her judgment clear, saving a life that statistics said should have been lost. Afterward, scrubbing out at the sink, she caught her reflection in the mirror. She looked tired, older than she had 6 weeks ago, marked by battles she'd never wanted to fight. But she also looked strong, certain, uncompromised. She looked like someone who'd stood when standing was dangerous, who'd fought when fighting seemed futile, who'd refused to accept that institutional authority meant individual powerlessness. Dr. York found her in the surgical scrub room. "Emma, I just got word. The state medical board is investigating complaints against 3 other hospitals in the county network. Your case triggered reviews that are exposing corruption across the entire regional healthcare system." Emma dried her hands carefully. "How many hospitals?" "Potentially 7. All connected through similar shell company arrangements, all showing patterns of budget manipulation and procurement fraud. Your refusal to be silenced didn't just reform Riverside, it's reforming the entire system." That evening, Emma returned to the Crossroads Diner for the first time since the incident. The same booth, the same fluorescent lights, the same smell of coffee and pie. But everything felt different now. Not threatening, but reclaimed, transformed from the site of her assault into evidence of her survival. The waitress who'd served her that first night approached cautiously. "Dr. Caldwell, it's good to see you back." "It's good to be back. Your meal is on the house, management's orders. They want you to know this diner stands with you." Emma accepted the gesture, ordering her usual black coffee and whatever pie hadn't sold out. Tonight it was apple, warm and perfect, exactly what she needed. As she ate, other patrons approached, some to thank her, some to share their own stories of abuse they'd never reported, some simply to shake her hand and acknowledge what her stand had accomplished. Emma listened to each one, offering encouragement, providing resources, refusing to minimize their experiences or her own. By the time she finished her pie, the diner had become something new. Not just a restaurant, but a community space where people felt safe sharing stories they'd kept silent, where resistance was validated rather than punished, where accountability felt possible rather than impossible. Emma paid her bill despite the waitress's insistence it was free, leaving a generous tip because working people who stood up for justice deserved to be supported. She walked out into cool night air, feeling the weight of recent weeks settling into something like peace. Her phone buzzed one final time. Text from an unknown number. Dr. Caldwell, my name is Marcus Brennan. I wanted to apologize for what I did to you. I was wrong. I abused my authority. I hurt people who didn't deserve it. I'm facing consequences now that I should have faced years ago. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did, and I'm sorry. Emma stared at the message for a long moment. Part of her wanted to delete it, to refuse engagement with someone who'd assaulted her. But another part recognized the courage it took to apologize without expectation of absolution, to acknowledge wrongdoing when doing so provided no benefit. She typed back, "Your apology doesn't undo the harm, but acknowledgement is necessary for any possibility of real change. I hope you use your time in prison to understand not just what you did, but why you thought it was acceptable. And I hope you'll support reforms that prevent the next officer from making your mistakes." She didn't know if Brennan would read the message, if it would matter, if genuine change was possible for someone who'd spent years weaponizing authority. But she'd said what needed saying, not forgiveness, but recognition that accountability required understanding as well as punishment. Emma drove home through streets she'd learned to navigate over 2 years, through a town that would forever be changed by what had happened in one diner on one night, when one person refused to accept that authority meant submission. In her apartment, she updated her calendar for tomorrow: surgery at 7 a.m., ethics training at noon, board meeting at 3 p.m. Normal work in abnormal times, professional duties in a system still learning to value justice over comfort. Before sleep, she reviewed the institutional reforms she'd helped draft: mandatory reporting protocols, ethics oversight committees, protection for whistleblowers, regular audits of procurement and employment practices. None of it guaranteed perfection. All of it made abuse harder to hide and easier to challenge. Progress, not victory. Process, not conclusion. Constant work towards systems that actually served the people they claimed to protect. Emma Caldwell had been sent to Hollow Ridge as an unwitting intelligence asset, positioned to expose corruption she didn't know she'd be fighting. She'd been assaulted in a diner by a deputy who saw her as someone who could be controlled. She'd survived assassination attempts, institutional retaliation, and coordinated campaigns to silence her. And she'd won. Not perfectly, not completely, but meaningfully. She'd proven that one person refusing to be powerless could trigger changes affecting thousands. That quiet strength could topple institutional arrogance. That being underestimated was advantage rather than weakness. Most importantly, she'd proven that resistance was possible. That people facing abuse didn't have to accept it. That systems enabling corruption could be challenged, that justice, however imperfect, could still be achieved by those brave enough to demand it. As she drifted toward sleep, Emma thought about the young woman who'd called her after being pulled over, about Sarah Mitchell and the other nurses finding courage to challenge workplace abuse, about Jessica Martinez testifying despite fear, about everyone who'd seen her story and decided their own silence could end. That was the real victory. Not her personal vindication, but the permission she'd given others to fight their own battles. The example she'd set that standing up was possible even when standing up was dangerous. Tomorrow she'd save lives in surgery. She'd train residents in ethics. She'd continue building systems that made institutional abuse harder to perpetrate and easier to expose. But tonight, she could rest knowing she'd done something that mattered. Not just surviving her own battle, but making the next battle slightly more winnable for whoever fought it. Emma Caldwell had been underestimated, dismissed, and assaulted by people who thought power meant impunity. She'd proven them catastrophically wrong. And in doing so, she'd shown everyone watching that quiet strength, principled resistance, and absolute refusal to accept abuse could change not just individual situations, but entire systems. That was power that no authority could strip away. That was victory that no defeat could diminish. That was justice that no corruption could permanently deny. And that was exactly the legacy she intended to leave.